The world was about to change, but no one knew it yet. All it took was one unassuming announcement, a name that no one expected to hear. Lucas Thompson. At just 6 years old, Lucas had spent his entire life tinkering with gadgets, taking apart old electronics, and understanding how things worked in a way that baffled even the brightest minds. He wasn't just playing with toys. He was building things, creating inventions, and discovering hidden truths about the world. Most kids his age were out playing with Legos or drawing pictures of dinosaurs, but Lucas, he was creating new sources of energy in his bedroom, unaware that his next idea would send shockwaves through the tech world. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It was a warm Saturday morning when the announcement came. The most anticipated global technology competition for young minds, Genius of Tomorrow, was broadcasting live from Silicon Valley. Bright, innovative young scientists from around the world were preparing to present their ideas that could change the future. But one name stood out from all the others: Lucas Thompson. A 6-year-old boy with a breakthrough that would make even the legendary Elon Musk sit up and take notice. What happens when a 6-year-old genius forces the world's greatest innovator to admit defeat? The question echoed across social media and news outlets everywhere. The world was about to find out. Lucas, his face framed by wild curls, sat in front of his homemade workbench, scribbling notes in a notebook far too large for his small hands. His mother, Dr. Amelia Thompson, stood behind him, watching with a mixture of pride and disbelief. She had always known Lucas was extraordinary. Her son was a prodigy, a child who understood complex scientific concepts that took even seasoned researchers years to grasp. But this was something different. Lucas was about to present his most revolutionary idea yet, an energy storage system that could revolutionize the way the world used power. The implications were world-changing. "Are you ready?" Amelia asked softly, though she already knew the answer. Lucas didn't look up from his work. His tiny fingers continued to scribble equations across the page, his mind racing ahead of everything. "I think it's ready. I just need to fix the wire in the generator." "Lucas, honey," Amelia smiled, walking over and placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "The world is watching. Your ideas are going to change everything." Lucas looked up for the first time, his big brown eyes meeting his mother's. There was no excitement there, only quiet confidence, the kind that only comes from knowing you are on the verge of something incredible. "I'm not nervous, Mom. It's just, I don't know why no one has thought of this before." Amelia couldn't help but laugh softly. "Because you're the only one who sees things the way you do." The day of the competition arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. Crowds gathered, celebrities, inventors, and tech moguls were all in attendance. The judges included some of the most prominent names in the tech world, but it was one name that overshadowed them all: Elon Musk. The 49-year-old billionaire entrepreneur, the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla, had built an empire on the back of his groundbreaking innovations. Musk had changed the world with his electric cars, reusable rockets, and relentless push to solve global energy crises. He was a man who had made it his life's mission to change the way humanity powered its future. Yet, in a quiet corner of the event hall, there was Lucas Thompson. And though he was just a child, there was something about the way he held himself, something that suggested that his ideas might just be the most important of them all. As the event began, the audience was introduced to dozens of young prodigies, each presenting their own take on the future of technology. There were robots that could read minds, algorithms that could predict the future, and even a young girl who had invented a device that could translate animal sounds into human speech. But when Lucas' name was called, the room fell silent. The spotlight was on him as he stepped onto the stage, holding a small, metallic box that seemed far too advanced for a child his age. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the excitement of knowing that the work of years, the countless hours of tinkering and experimenting, had brought him to this very moment. His tiny voice broke the silence as he spoke to the crowd. "Hi, my name is Lucas Thompson. I'm 6 years old, and I've discovered a new way to store energy that's cheaper, cleaner, and can be used anywhere." The audience exchanged puzzled looks. A 6-year-old? Most of them had assumed the competition was for older kids, even teenagers. How could someone so young possibly have a meaningful contribution? Elon Musk, sitting in the front row, raised an eyebrow. It was clear he was skeptical. He'd heard all kinds of grandiose claims before, especially from young prodigies with big ideas, but never from a child this young. He was intrigued, if only for the novelty. Lucas continued, showing how his system could store energy without the need for expensive, rare materials. The technology was simple but effective. Unlike traditional energy storage, which relied on lithium-ion batteries, Lucas' design used a much more accessible material, carbon nanotubes, which could hold energy more efficiently and at a fraction of the cost. The potential was enormous, especially for developing countries where energy access remained a major issue. As Lucas explained his invention, his words were met with stunned silence. Some of the scientists and judges whispered among themselves, exchanging confused and surprised glances. This couldn't be real, could it? Musk was the first to speak. "I don't mean to be rude, but you're 6 years old," he said, a slight chuckle in his voice. "How can anyone, let alone a child, possibly have developed a technology that even my engineers are still working on?" Lucas didn't flinch. He simply met Musk's gaze, his small hands steady as he adjusted his glasses. "Because I didn't follow what others were doing. I thought differently," Lucas said, his voice calm and measured. The room held its breath. The tension was palpable. And so, the world began to watch. Would a 6-year-old genius be able to topple the giants of industry? Would Elon Musk, one of the most brilliant minds of this generation, be forced to admit defeat by a child whose potential had just begun to reveal itself? Lucas Thompson's childhood was anything but ordinary. While other children his age were learning to read simple picture books and play with toy trains, Lucas was dissecting old computers, making his own circuits with spare parts, and teaching himself complex physics theories. Most parents worried about their children's first steps or whether they could tie their shoes. But for Amelia Thompson, the only worry was whether Lucas would break another soldering iron or blow up the family's outdated microwave in one of his experiments. Amelia, a former physicist turned professor, had always known her son was special. From the moment Lucas could speak, he was reciting basic principles of thermodynamics. By the time he was 4, he was asking questions about the flow of electrons, and by 5, he had already built a crude solar panel using scraps from old radios and small batteries. People often called Lucas a child prodigy, but to Amelia, he was just her son. A boy with a brilliant mind and a heart full of curiosity. She nurtured his natural gift, never pushing him too hard but always guiding him, providing the resources he needed to explore his passion for science and technology. She'd never seen a child so naturally drawn to solving complex problems. Lucas wasn't the type to play with action figures or play video games like other kids his age. Instead, he was more likely to be found in their cluttered garage, surrounded by tools, wires, and old gadgets, trying to create something that hadn't been done before. At the age of 3, Lucas had already mastered basic coding, teaching himself the programming language Python by watching online tutorials. By 4, he'd written his first algorithm to optimize how much energy a small wind turbine could generate. Amelia was stunned when she saw the results. That was the moment she knew her son was destined for greatness. But even then, the future wasn't entirely clear. While other kids dreamt of becoming astronauts or firefighters, Lucas dreamt of building something that could solve one of the world's greatest challenges: sustainable energy. Most of his classmates at school didn't understand him, and he didn't understand them. They spent their days running around the playground, exchanging snacks, and talking about cartoons. Lucas spent his days reading books about quantum physics, building makeshift robots, or poring over textbooks on renewable energy. His teachers were impressed but worried. Was this normal for a child his age? They had never seen a first grader draw out complex schematics for a solar-powered water purifier. They had never witnessed a 6-year-old demonstrate a working model of a basic electric car. Yet, Lucas didn't feel different. He simply wanted to create, to find answers. His best friend, Clara, was one of the few people who truly understood him. Clara, an introverted, quiet girl with a keen interest in astronomy, was Lucas' constant companion during their after-school hours. The two would sit side by side at his workbench, designing new ideas, ideas that might change the world someday. Clara often marveled at Lucas' ability to see things in a way no one else did. "You know, Lucas," she said one day as they worked on an invention together, "I think you're going to build something that could save the world." Lucas paused, his small hands hovering over his soldering iron, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't want to save the world," he said after a moment. "I just want to make sure that it doesn't run out of the things it needs to survive. Like energy. If we run out of that, it's all over." Clara didn't need to ask what he meant. She had seen the way his mind worked, always thinking ahead, always imagining possibilities. She knew that Lucas wasn't just playing at being an inventor. He was truly trying to figure out how to change the way the world operated. But there were challenges. Many, many challenges. While Amelia had always supported Lucas' interests, there were those who doubted him. His classmates often made fun of him, calling him the robot boy because of his obsession with machines and technology. Teachers, despite being impressed with his academic abilities, sometimes found it difficult to connect with him. How could a 6-year-old understand topics that most graduate students struggle to grasp? How could they explain basic concepts of social interaction when Lucas was more interested in the behavior of electrons than the behavior of his peers? But none of this seemed to bother Lucas. In fact, it was a relief for him. He didn't want to be like everyone else. He wanted to be different. He wanted to be the one to figure out how to solve the problems that no one else could solve. And in a way, that feeling of isolation was his greatest strength. It freed him to think in ways no one else could. On the day Lucas was invited to participate in the Genius of Tomorrow competition, Amelia had been skeptical at first. Was he truly ready? She knew her son was a genius, but this was different. This was a global stage. This was where the world's brightest minds came to prove their worth. What if they laughed at him? What if they dismissed him as a child, unable to grasp the seriousness of such a competition? But Lucas was determined. His eyes sparkled with excitement when he found out he had been selected to compete. "Mom, this is it. This is the chance to show everyone that energy doesn't have to be expensive or hard to store. I have an idea that can change everything." And so, Amelia reluctantly agreed, knowing that Lucas would not back down. He had been working on a new technology for months, a form of energy storage that could potentially revolutionize how the world used electricity. He had built the prototype in their basement, a small metallic box with intricate wiring and sensors that looked like it belonged in a laboratory. It was simple, but effective, a design that could reduce the cost of renewable energy storage dramatically. But to make it a reality, Lucas would need to convince the biggest names in the industry, names like Elon Musk, whose reputation for innovation and cutting-edge technology preceded him. As Amelia prepared Lucas for his presentation at Genius of Tomorrow, she couldn't help but feel a wave of nervousness wash over her. It wasn't because she doubted her son's ability. No, it was because she knew how the world could be cruel to those who were different, especially a 6-year-old with such big ideas. "Just be yourself, Lucas," she said, smoothing his shirt as he stood in front of her. "You've worked hard for this, and no matter what happens, I'm proud of you." Lucas looked up at her, his face filled with quiet determination. "I know, Mom. I'll do my best." The stage was set. The world would soon learn just how powerful the mind of a 6-year-old could be. The Genius of Tomorrow competition was a spectacle like no other. The largest auditorium in Silicon Valley had been transformed into a futuristic hub of innovation, filled with giant screens, futuristic displays, and the buzz of excitement from the young prodigies and their families. Hundreds of people packed the room. Scientists, engineers, investors, and a few curious spectators. The air was thick with anticipation, but also with an undercurrent of skepticism. Everyone was waiting to see who would come out on top. And that day, all eyes were on Lucas Thompson. Lucas stood backstage, looking around nervously, though his expression remained calm. His tiny hands held a small, sleek box. His prototype, the culmination of months of sleepless nights and hours of trial and error. His mother, Amelia, stood beside him, offering quiet encouragement. "You've got this, Lucas," Amelia whispered, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Remember, it's not about proving anything to anyone. Just share your ideas and let them see the magic." Lucas nodded without saying a word. He didn't feel nervous, not really. He had done the work. He knew his idea was groundbreaking. It was the rest of the world that would have to catch up. When it was finally his turn, the stage lights shifted, casting a harsh glow over Lucas. He walked confidently toward the center of the stage, and the audience fell silent as they saw the small boy in front of them. A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd, but it was quickly quelled by the host, a tech journalist with years of experience covering the biggest names in Silicon Valley. Next up is Lucas Thompson, a 6-year-old inventor who's about to reveal something that could change the world. "Lucas, the floor is yours," the host said, his tone full of forced enthusiasm. Lucas adjusted his glasses and placed the sleek box down onto the table in front of him. He faced the audience, his gaze sweeping over the rows of spectators, and his eyes briefly locked with the skeptical face of Elon Musk, sitting just a few rows away, his arms crossed in front of him. The billionaire tech mogul's face was unreadable. Lucas had no idea if Musk was interested or just humoring him. "Hi, everyone," Lucas began, his voice steady and clear, though it was filled with a quiet authority beyond his years. "I'm Lucas Thompson. I'm 6 years old, and I've built something that I believe can change how the world uses energy." The audience exchanged glances. A 6-year-old? How could he possibly have anything of value to present in a competition where teenagers and young adults had showcased their innovations? The murmurs grew louder, but Lucas ignored them. He wasn't there to please anyone. He was there to present his idea. He took a deep breath and continued. "I've designed a new form of energy storage, one that is cheap, scalable, and can be used in any part of the world, no matter how developed or undeveloped. It's based on a material called carbon nanotubes, which are extremely efficient at holding energy. Traditional energy storage systems use lithium-ion batteries, but those are expensive and rely on rare minerals. What I've built is a storage system that could store more energy, last longer, and be built for a fraction of the cost." He paused, letting his words settle. There was a stunned silence in the room. People exchanged confused glances, unsure if they had heard him correctly. Carbon nanotubes? At 6 years old? That's what this kid's presenting. Lucas didn't mind the skepticism. He continued explaining his system. Carbon nanotubes are essentially tubes made of carbon atoms arranged in a cylindrical shape. They have unique properties that make them an ideal candidate for storing electrical charge. The problem with current storage systems is that they are heavy, inefficient, and difficult to scale. My system uses a new technique to create a more efficient nanotube structure that is both flexible and highly conductive. Lucas pulled out a small device from his bag, a handheld screen that displayed his calculations and the energy storage potential of his invention. The audience watched in silence as Lucas scrolled through diagrams, equations, and models. To them, it was like watching a prodigy at work. The equations were complex, far beyond anything a 6-year-old should be able to comprehend. A few of the judges leaned forward, intrigued by what they saw. One of the older engineers from a leading renewable energy company whispered to his colleague, Is that possible? Can a child really have cracked the code on energy storage?" But as Lucas continued, he could see the faces in the audience change. First curiosity, then surprise, and finally, disbelief. "That's impressive," one of the judges, a physicist from MIT, muttered under his breath. "But can it really scale?" Lucas smiled, almost as if he had been expecting this question. "I've already built a working prototype. It's small, but it works, and I believe it can be scaled up. Imagine a world where energy is available to everyone, where the cost of storing solar or wind energy isn't a barrier to widespread adoption." There was a beat of silence as the weight of his words hung in the air. This wasn't just about a simple toy or a neat gadget. This was about real-world change. Energy that could power homes, cities, and even entire countries at a fraction of the current cost. And then came the moment that no one was expecting. Elon Musk, who had been watching the entire presentation with narrowed eyes, stood up slowly from his seat. The entire room went still as Musk approached the stage. Lucas paused for a moment, his heart pounding. What was Musk going to say? Would he dismiss him? Laugh him off as just another hopeful child who didn't understand the intricacies of the tech industry? Musk walked up to the podium and stood beside Lucas, towering over him by nearly a foot. The audience was on the edge of their seats. Musk had a reputation for being brutally honest, and if anyone could crush Lucas' idea, it was him. "I have to admit," Musk said, his voice steady but with a touch of incredulity, "I was skeptical when I first heard a 6-year-old was going to be presenting today. But after seeing this, I'm impressed." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The word impressed, coming from Musk, was something no one had expected. He turned to the judges, then back to Lucas. "What you've created here is remarkable. It's not perfect, but the potential is clear. You've done what many of us have struggled to do, create a system that could change the game for energy storage. I didn't think it was possible at this stage, but now I see it might be." The room exploded in a mixture of disbelief and awe. A 6-year-old had just forced Elon Musk to admit, in front of hundreds of people, that he had underestimated him. But Lucas didn't react. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply nodded, his small hands gripping the edges of the podium. "Thank you, Mr. Musk. But it's not about me. It's about the future." The judges exchanged glances. The world had just witnessed the impossible. A 6-year-old child, with a breakthrough so profound, had just forced the greatest innovator of the century to rethink everything he thought he knew about energy. The buzz surrounding Lucas Thompson's presentation didn't fade with the end of the competition. It exploded. News outlets picked up the story instantly. Headlines blared. 6-year-old prodigy's energy breakthrough could save the world. Elon Musk impressed by a child's groundbreaking invention. Is this the future of energy? A 6-year-old's game-changing idea? Within hours, Lucas' name was trending on social media. Online communities erupted with praise, and tech forums were flooded with discussions about his invention. #ThompsonEnergy became a viral hashtag, with people speculating about the potential of his idea. Lucas' mother, Amelia, watched with a mix of pride and concern. The floodgates had opened, and the world was taking notice. But as the story spread, so did the challenges. The first sign that things were getting complicated came the next morning, when Lucas was interviewed by a major tech news outlet. The journalist, a seasoned reporter named Adam Garcia, was known for his tough, probing questions. He wasn't going to let a 6-year-old prodigy off the hook easily. "So, Lucas," Adam began, sitting across from him in his studio room, "your energy storage system is incredibly impressive, but let's talk about the logistics. How can we trust a 6-year-old to have created something this sophisticated? It's not like any traditional technology that's been peer-reviewed. And there are still so many questions, like scalability, cost, and safety. Have you considered these challenges?" Lucas, perched on the edge of his seat, adjusted his glasses and looked at Adam with unwavering confidence. "I've thought about it a lot," he said. "I know my system isn't perfect, but it works, and I believe it can be improved. I'm not doing this alone. My mom is a scientist, and I have a team of experts who are helping me. We're going to figure out how to make it scalable." Amelia, who sat quietly off camera, nodded at her son's answer, feeling a burst of pride. This was her Lucas, calm, confident, and ready to face whatever the world threw at him. Adam wasn't convinced, though. "And what about the existing energy companies? Do you think they'll just accept that a 6-year-old might have discovered a way to disrupt their multi-billion-dollar industry?" Lucas didn't hesitate. "They'll have to. If they really want to help the world, they'll see that this technology can make energy accessible to everyone, especially people who don't have the money for expensive energy storage solutions. I'm not trying to fight them. I'm trying to work with them." Adam shifted in his chair, clearly taken aback by the maturity of Lucas' response. "I suppose we'll see if you can make it happen. Good luck, Lucas." Despite Lucas' calm demeanor, things were starting to take a darker turn behind the scenes. The day after the interview, a series of emails arrived in Amelia's inbox. The first was from a well-known energy conglomerate, EtherTech. The email was polite but firm. They requested a meeting with Lucas and his mother, expressing interest in exploring collaboration opportunities. Amelia, however, could sense the underlying tone, a mix of curiosity and calculation. This wasn't a simple offer of collaboration. It was the first sign that corporate giants were taking notice and, likely, were preparing to assert their dominance over Lucas' invention. The second email was even more unsettling. It was a warning of sorts. The sender was anonymous, but the message was clear. You've created something that threatens the status quo. Be careful. People don't like to lose their power. Amelia stared at the screen for a long moment, her hand hovering over the keyboard. The energy sector had more than its fair share of powerful players who wouldn't hesitate to crush competition, no matter how young or innocent the challenger was. What had started as a proud moment for Lucas was quickly turning into a battle against forces far larger than either of them had anticipated. She looked over at Lucas, who was playing with a toy robot in the corner of the room. He had no idea the magnitude of the storm brewing around him. "Mom, what's wrong?" Lucas asked, noticing the concerned look on her face. Amelia gave a small smile, trying to keep her worry from showing. "Nothing, honey. Just thinking about all the work we need to do. The world is starting to notice your ideas." Lucas beamed with excitement. "Does that mean I get to build more stuff?" "Exactly," Amelia said, though her heart weighed heavy with the knowledge that their lives were about to change in ways they hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, across the country, in the sleek, modern offices of EtherTech, a meeting was taking place. The company's CEO, Gregory Shaw, a man in his mid-50s with a reputation for being a ruthless businessman, sat behind a massive glass desk, watching the news coverage of Lucas. EtherTech had long been the leader in energy storage solutions, their lithium-ion batteries dominating the market. But this new energy storage system Lucas had developed, it was everything Shaw's company had feared. It was cheaper, more efficient, and it didn't rely on the expensive raw materials that powered their multi-billion-dollar empire. Shaw wasn't the kind of man who took kindly to threats, especially not from a child. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together as he thought. A plan was already forming in his mind. The very next day, the Thompsons were invited to meet with EtherTech's team in New York City. The invitation seemed friendly enough, an opportunity to discuss potential partnerships. Amelia felt a knot form in her stomach as she read the email. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a veiled request for Lucas to give up control over his invention. When they arrived at the corporate headquarters, the glass and steel of the building were as intimidating as the emails had been. Inside, the air was cold and sterile, with security guards at every corner. Lucas and Amelia were escorted into a high-rise conference room, where a large, sleek table sat in the center. Gregory Shaw was already there, waiting for them, his dark eyes gleaming with a businesslike intensity. "Miss Thompson," Shaw began, offering a tight smile, "it's a pleasure to finally meet you. And of course, it's an honor to meet the brilliant Lucas. We've been following your work closely." Lucas, oblivious to the tension in the room, smiled and waved. "Hi, Mr. Shaw." Shaw chuckled softly, but it wasn't a warm laugh. "Let's cut to the chase. We've seen your energy storage system, Lucas, and we believe it has great potential. We're willing to offer you a deal, a partnership. You'll have access to our resources, our manufacturing capabilities, our research teams. In return, you'll give us exclusive rights to your design." Amelia's heart sank. She could feel the weight of the offer pressing down on her. It wasn't a partnership. It was an attempt to control Lucas' invention, to absorb his work into the corporate machine. "Exclusive rights?" Amelia repeated, her voice steady but with an edge of suspicion. "Yes," Shaw said, leaning forward. "You see, Lucas, your invention is groundbreaking, but it's going to take a lot of resources to bring it to scale. A company like ours, well, we can help make your dream a reality, but only if you're willing to work with us." The offer hung in the air like a guillotine. Lucas looked up at his mother, then back at Shaw, his small face serious. "I don't want to give up my idea. I want to help people, not just make money." Amelia squeezed his hand gently under the table. "I agree, Lucas. We'll have to think this over." As the meeting ended, Shaw's smile remained. But it wasn't the friendly smile of a man making a simple offer. It was the smile of someone who believed he'd already won. The city lights of New York flickered below the towering skyscraper as Amelia Thompson sat silently in the back of a sleek black car, Lucas by her side. The weight of the day's meeting with EtherTech's CEO, Gregory Shaw, pressed heavily on her chest. The ride back to their hotel felt long, the hum of the engine almost deafening in its silence. Lucas, his eyes wide with curiosity, gazed out the window, unaware of the storm brewing inside his mother. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you think we should work with them?" Shaw seemed nice. Amelia's fingers gripped her phone, the screen still glowing with the email from Shaw's office, waiting for her reply. It was a clear offer, the resources of one of the largest energy companies in the world. But at what cost? Exclusive rights. That phrase echoed in her mind like a warning bell. Was it a partnership or a corporate takeover of her son's genius? She exhaled slowly, looking at Lucas. His innocence, his boundless trust in the world, made her heart ache. This wasn't just about a technology, it was about his future. And the world. Well, the world wasn't kind to people who were too young, too naive, or too idealistic. "I don't know, sweetheart," she replied, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I think we need to think about it more." Lucas turned his gaze back to the window. "You said we're going to help people, right?" Amelia's heart skipped a beat. That simple question had such gravity to it. How could she explain the complexities of the world to a 6-year-old? The pressure, the money, the power? How could she protect Lucas from the people who would try to control him, while still giving him the freedom to create something that could change everything? The car turned onto a quieter street, and Amelia made a decision. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick reply to Shaw's offer. "Thank you for your offer, Mr. Shaw. We'll take some time to consider it. We'll get back to you soon." She hit send, knowing the storm was only beginning. Back at the hotel, Amelia paced back and forth in the small, sterile room, her mind racing. Every possible scenario played out in her head. EtherTech had the resources to bring Lucas' invention to life, faster, bigger, with global reach. But they were also the type of company that didn't play fair. Once they had control of his technology, they would own it. They would own him. What if Lucas wasn't ready to fight this battle? What if they crushed him before he even had a chance to succeed? She thought about the anonymous email she had received, warning her about the dangers of Lucas' invention. The tech world was a vicious place, full of egos and corporate giants desperate to maintain their hold on the market. If EtherTech wasn't the problem, someone else would be. And the idea of letting Lucas fight alone, without the resources to protect his invention, scared her more than anything. Lucas sat at the small desk in the room, tapping away at his toy robot, completely unaware of the weight of the world pressing down on them. She couldn't risk his dreams being crushed under the weight of corporate greed. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a new email. "We've been watching you closely. Lucas' energy storage system is brilliant. I believe we can help you. Let's talk." The email was from a name Amelia didn't recognize at first, Dr. Claire Aldrich. She was an expert in sustainable energy, known for advocating for eco-friendly tech startups and supporting young innovators. Amelia had heard her name before, but never in connection with big companies like EtherTech. Dr. Aldrich's reputation had always been that of an independent, idealistic scientist, a rarity in today's corporate world. Amelia read the message again, trying to understand the implications. Dr. Aldrich wasn't offering a partnership with a huge company. She was offering something different: guidance, mentorship, and the resources to help Lucas' invention succeed on its own terms. "We believe the world deserves better than what the big corporations are offering. You and Lucas are the key to that. If you're open to it, let's meet." Amelia felt a rush of relief. This was the sign she had been hoping for. A way to protect Lucas, a way to keep his invention in the right hands. She typed a response. "Thank you, Dr. Aldrich. We'd love to meet. Let's talk soon." The next morning, Amelia and Lucas boarded a flight to meet Dr. Aldrich in Boston. Amelia's mind was clearer now, though still full of questions. Dr. Aldrich's offer wasn't just about protecting Lucas' invention. It was about giving him a path forward that didn't involve corporate control. But there was still the matter of EtherTech. Back in California, Gregory Shaw wasn't the type to wait patiently. As soon as he received Amelia's email rejecting the partnership, he didn't hesitate. His response was swift, and he wasn't prepared to let a 6-year-old disrupt the future of energy without a fight. He had connections, powerful ones. Shaw's company had enough influence to make Lucas' life difficult, even if he didn't immediately have the rights to the technology. He knew the right people in the government, the right people in academia, and the right people in other corporations who could help bury Lucas' invention before it ever saw the light of day. Shaw's first call was to a former college associate, Senator Nathaniel Brooks, a longtime advocate for the energy sector and a frequent collaborator with EtherTech. Shaw's plan was simple: apply pressure through political channels, delay the development of Lucas technology through bureaucratic red tape, and force Amelia and Lucas into a corner where they would have no choice but to accept a partnership with EtherTech. Senator Brooks, Shaw said smoothly, his voice oozing with confidence, I need a favor. You know that young prodigy, Lucas Thompson, right? The 6-year-old who claims to have solved the energy crisis. Brooks chuckled darkly. I've heard of him. What about him? I want you to make sure his idea stays grounded. The last thing we need is some kid making energy storage cheaper and more efficient. It threatens billions in investments. It's bad for business, Brooks. You know how this works. I'll get my people on it, Brooks replied, his voice colder now. But you owe me, Shaw. You know that. Shaw smiled. Consider it done. We'll talk soon. Meanwhile, Amelia and Lucas arrived in Boston, greeted by Dr. Claire Aldridge in a small but inviting office filled with books, blueprints, and models of renewable energy projects. The room smelled faintly of fresh coffee and paper, a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal corporate meetings they just left behind. Dr. Aldridge greeted them with a warm handshake and a smile. Amelia, Lucas, thank you for coming, Dr. Aldridge said. I've been following Lucas' work, and I believe it's the key to a more sustainable future. I want to help you build this, but on your own terms, without selling out to the corporate giants. Lucas looked up at her, his eyes shining with curiosity. You think my idea can help people? Dr. Aldridge smiled, crouching down to his level. I believe it can change the world, Lucas, and I'm here to help you make that happen. Amelia let out a sigh of relief. This felt right. This was the path forward that Lucas deserved. But little did they know, EtherTech had already set their plan in motion. The real fight had just begun. The city of Boston had never seemed so quiet. Amelia Thompson couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this much relief. It was as if the noise of the world had quieted down, replaced by something far more reassuring. Dr. Claire Aldridge's office was a haven of calm, its walls lined with bookshelves filled with research papers, energy reports, and models of wind turbines and solar panels. Unlike the cold, corporate rooms of EtherTech, everything here seemed designed with purpose. There was a genuine sense of passion, of mission. Lucas was busy inspecting a small solar-powered robot sitting on the desk in front of him, his tiny hands delicately adjusting its gears and wires. Dr. Aldridge, seated across from Amelia, watched them both with a gentle smile. I've been thinking about your son's energy storage design, Dr. Aldridge said, her tone thoughtful. It's brilliant, really. A hybrid system that not only stores energy more efficiently, but could be used in homes, schools, even remote villages. There's so much potential here, Amelia. With the right team, we can scale this up. Amelia leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She'd spent the last 24 hours weighing her options, consulting with experts, and considering the risks. The fact that they were sitting here now, discussing a real chance to bring Lucas' invention to life, felt almost surreal. After their meeting with EtherTech, she'd been afraid. Afraid that Lucas' dream would be swallowed whole by a corporation that didn't care about people, only profits. But now, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I just want to make sure Lucas' idea stays his, Amelia said, her voice soft but firm. I don't want to sell it. I want him to have control. This isn't just about business. This is about something bigger than that. Dr. Aldridge nodded in agreement. And that's exactly why we're going to help. I've already reached out to some of my contacts. We can secure funding without giving up control. We just need to be strategic. We can build a sustainable model that competes with the big players, but on our own terms. As they continued discussing the possibilities, Lucas excused himself to explore the office further, his curiosity driving him to investigate every nook and cranny. Amelia watched him for a moment, her heart swelling with both pride and protectiveness. This child, this brilliant, compassionate child, was the future. He was on the verge of changing the world, but the world was full of dangers. What if they weren't strong enough to fight back? What if EtherTech's corporate power was too much? Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was an email from an unfamiliar address. Amelia, I understand the gravity of your decision, but know that there are more forces at play here than you realize. If you think you can fight EtherTech and the established energy powers, you're mistaken. This is bigger than Lucas. They'll stop at nothing to control this technology. You need to reconsider your options. A friend. Amelia stared at the screen, her gut twisting. Another anonymous warning. It wasn't the first time she'd received one, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. She thought back to the email she'd received before the meeting with EtherTech, the one warning her about the dangers Lucas' invention posed to powerful interests. Dr. Aldridge's voice brought her back to the present. Amelia, are you okay? You've gone pale. Amelia blinked, shaking her head. I'm fine. I'm just thinking. There are so many people watching us, Claire, and I don't know if we're ready for this. I don't know if I can protect Lucas. Dr. Aldridge placed a reassuring hand on Amelia's. You're not alone in this. We've got a team, and more importantly, we have something they can't replicate, genuine vision. EtherTech has power, but we have truth on our side. If we can stay true to the mission, we'll find a way through. But Amelia couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something dark was coming. They'd barely scratched the surface, and yet it felt as if every step forward was matched by a shadow, always lurking just behind them. Back in California, Gregory Shaw wasn't one to sit idly by. He knew that his company's competitors, particularly independent innovators like Lucas, represented the greatest threat to EtherTech's dominance in the energy industry. He wasn't about to let a 6-year-old and his idealistic mother derail years of work. Shaw had already made his move, contacting his network of investors, government allies, and legal teams to prepare for what he knew would be a long fight. The Thompsons and Dr. Aldridge might think they were going to do things their own way, but Shaw wasn't going to let them, not without a few tricks up his sleeve. One of his first calls was to a powerful venture capital firm that had a long history of backing tech giants. He'd worked with them before and knew they could get the ball rolling on legal and financial pressure to slow down Lucas' progress. I need you to create a financial roadblock for Dr. Aldridge's team, Shaw told his contact, Peter Greaves, over the phone. You know what to do. Delay their funding, apply pressure with regulations, and make sure Lucas' invention is as difficult to bring to market as possible. Peter's voice was smooth and confident. We've got the resources to make it happen. I'll get the legal teams involved, too. We'll make sure they don't see a penny. Shaw leaned back in his chair, satisfaction curling his lips. He knew how the game was played. It wasn't about beating them at their own game. It was about making sure they never got the chance to play. But Shaw wasn't counting on one thing. Lucas Thompson wasn't just any ordinary kid. And Amelia wasn't about to let him be crushed under the weight of corporate greed. The next few days were a whirlwind. Dr. Aldridge's team quickly began working with Lucas and Amelia to refine the prototype. They secured an independent lab to test the energy storage system's capabilities, ensuring the technology was as efficient and scalable as Lucas had promised. Amelia felt more confident each day, knowing they were making progress, but the growing sense of urgency never quite left her. Then, just as they were preparing to present their findings to potential investors, they received a call from the lab. It's the test results, Dr. Aldridge said, her voice tense. They're off the charts, Amelia. This technology is even more powerful than we thought. But there's a catch. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Is something wrong? The energy system is so advanced, it could disrupt the current infrastructure. It's causing an imbalance in some of the older testing equipment. It's that efficient. If we're not careful, we might end up attracting more attention than we're ready for. Amelia felt her pulse quicken. She had known that Lucas' invention was groundbreaking, but this was something entirely different. Suddenly, the weight of their mission hit her harder than ever. EtherTech had underestimated Lucas, but now the stakes were much higher. Amelia, Dr. Aldridge continued, I think we need to move faster. The last thing we want is for EtherTech, or anyone else, to catch wind of this before we're ready. Amelia took a deep breath. She was done waiting. She had made up her mind. We're moving forward, she said, her voice steady with determination. We don't back down. Not now. Not ever. Lucas, who had been listening intently from the other side of the room, walked up to his mother with a curious look on his face. You said we're going to help people, right? he asked, his small voice filled with certainty. Amelia smiled at him, pride swelling in her chest. Yes, sweetheart. We're going to change the world. But as they took their first steps toward realizing that dream, one thing was clear. The fight for Lucas' future was only just beginning. The morning sky in Boston was overcast, clouds lingering like heavy thoughts above the city. Amelia Thompson stared out the window of their small apartment, the weight of the past week's events pressing down on her chest. Lucas was sitting at the kitchen table, his little fingers flying over the design blueprints they'd been working on with Dr. Aldridge's team. He was completely absorbed, as usual. His innocence and focus on the task at hand reminded her of why they couldn't back down. But things were changing. Fast. Dr. Aldridge had informed them that investors were now taking serious interest in Lucas' invention. It was no longer just about energy storage. It was about a complete shift in how the world could approach sustainable power. If they could scale this technology, they could power entire cities without fossil fuels. The ripple effect was enormous, but so was the risk. Amelia's phone buzzed, and she reluctantly picked it up. It was an email from Peter Greaves, the venture capitalist Shaw had enlisted to apply pressure. Amelia, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to remind you that EtherTech has the resources to back up their claims. They're not going to let this child's play go unchecked. You and Dr. Aldridge can't afford to ignore the legal implications of moving forward with Lucas' invention. There's still time to discuss your options with us. Peter. Amelia stared at the email, her fingers tightening around the phone. So it begins. The corporate machinery was in full swing now. Peter's words were a subtle warning, an offer to work with them and avoid the coming storm. She didn't have to be a corporate lawyer to understand what was happening. They were trying to put pressure on her, to make her second-guess her next move. Amelia knew they couldn't play nice with EtherTech. Not anymore. The gloves were off. Lucas looked up from his drawings, his expression a little more serious than usual. He had a way of sensing when something was off. Mom, is something wrong? He asked, his voice small but insistent. Amelia felt a pang in her heart. How could she explain the danger they were in? How could she protect him from the world that was closing in on them? She sat down next to him and took his hand, the reality of the situation heavy in her mind. Sweetheart, we're going to do something very important. Something that could change the world for the better. But there are people who don't want that. They don't want us to succeed. Lucas tilted his head, his brow furrowing in confusion. Why? Because, sometimes, people want to control things. And when something is as big as what you're doing, they'll try to stop it. But we're not going to let them. We're going to keep going, no matter what. Lucas nodded solemnly, his small face filled with a rare seriousness. Okay, Mom. I want to help people. So let's do it. Amelia felt her heart swell with pride. If only the world could see things through Lucas' eyes. It was that kind of purity that made the fight worth it. Later that day, Dr. Aldridge arrived with some unsettling news. I've received a tip-off, she said, her voice tight. EtherTech's legal team is already preparing to launch a series of lawsuits. They're targeting the patents Lucas and I filed for the technology. And I've been told they're planning to challenge the legitimacy of the research, claiming the technology is a violation of existing energy laws. Amelia felt the room tilt for a moment. Lawsuits. That was always the first tactic corporations used when they were threatened, dragging everything through endless legal battles until the smaller players either gave up or ran out of money. How long do we have? Amelia asked, her voice tense. Dr. Aldridge's eyes darkened. Not long. They're already making calls to the press. If they push this hard enough, it could slow us down for months, if not years. They'll accuse us of infringing on intellectual property and use their influence to have regulators shut us down. Amelia leaned forward, her mind racing. She couldn't let that happen. Not to Lucas. Not to their dream. What do we do? Amelia asked, her voice almost a whisper. Dr. Aldridge took a deep breath, looking around the room. We fight back. We don't have the legal resources they do, but we have something they don't, credibility. We have the truth on our side. If we go public now, we can rally support, expose what EtherTech is trying to do. The public has already started talking about Lucas' invention. If we get ahead of this, if we control the narrative, we can fight them in the court of public opinion. Amelia felt a rush of determination. It was time to take the gloves off. The next few days were a whirlwind of press conferences, interviews, and strategy meetings. Dr. Aldrich had contacted some of her most trusted allies in the renewable energy field, and together, they began crafting a media campaign that would turn the tables on EtherTech. They had to move fast. Time was of the essence. Amelia took a step back as Dr. Aldrich led most of the press interactions. It was a delicate balance, using Lucas' story to inspire the public, while also positioning them as the underdogs fighting for the future of energy. They needed to make sure that EtherTech's actions were seen for what they were: corporate greed and a blatant attempt to stifle innovation. The media buzz around Lucas grew every day. News outlets across the country were picking up the story of the 6-year-old genius with the world-changing energy storage system. But just as quickly, EtherTech's legal team pushed back. They issued statements accusing the Thompsons and Dr. Aldrich of intellectual property theft, claiming that Lucas' design was stolen from a project the company had developed years earlier. But Dr. Aldrich's team was ready. They had proof of Lucas' original designs, and more importantly, they had access to former EtherTech engineers who were willing to testify that Lucas had independently developed the system, without any influence from the company. The media took notice. The narrative was shifting. More and more people were starting to question EtherTech's motives. Some of the biggest environmental influencers began rallying behind Lucas' cause, calling for a shift away from corporate-controlled energy and toward sustainable, decentralized solutions. But just as they were gaining momentum, a darker force was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Gregory Shaw wasn't about to let this public backlash derail everything he had worked for. If the media campaign wasn't going to work, he would have to take matters into his own hands. Shaw reached out to his top lobbyists and legal advisors. The time had come to pull out the big guns. They couldn't just stall Lucas and Dr. Aldrich. They needed to discredit them completely. In a closed-door meeting with his legal team, Shaw laid out the plan. "We're not just going after their patents," Shaw said coldly. "We're going to destroy their credibility. We'll go after their finances, smear their names in the press, and make sure their supporters back off. We need to make them radioactive. If the public sees them as untrustworthy, the momentum will shift in our favor. No one will want to touch this technology." Shaw's eyes gleamed with a calculating look. "And if we can tie Lucas to some questionable connections, maybe some shady dealings with independent investors or environmental activists, we'll have a full-blown scandal on our hands." His legal team nodded in agreement. They had the resources to make it happen. Shaw's influence was far-reaching, and if they played their cards right, they could bury the Thompsons' dream before it ever saw the light of day. The pressure was beginning to weigh on Amelia in ways she hadn't expected. Every day, the phone calls came. More threats, more pressure from every direction. The constant flood of media coverage wasn't helping. It seemed like every outlet had a new angle on Lucas' invention, and more often than not, EtherTech's legal team was the one with the louder voice. The weight of it all, the attacks on Lucas' character, the accusations of intellectual property theft, was starting to feel insurmountable. But there was one thing Amelia had learned over the past few weeks. When it felt like everything was falling apart, sometimes the universe threw you a lifeline from the most unexpected place. Amelia was sitting at the small dining table in their apartment, her laptop open in front of her, reviewing the latest legal paperwork that had been sent by Dr. Aldrich's team. The email from Peter Greaves had been particularly unnerving. It outlined how EtherTech's legal team had filed a request with the government to freeze any new patents that might be associated with Lucas technology, citing suspicion of false claims and unverified intellectual property. It was a serious move, one that could delay everything by months, maybe years. "Mom." Lucas' voice cut through her thoughts. She looked up to see him standing at the edge of the table, his eyes wide with concern. "I'm okay, sweetheart," she said, forcing a smile. "Just trying to figure out what our next step is. Can I help?" Lucas asked, his small voice carrying an unusual seriousness. He had a way of sensing when things were tough, and right now, he seemed more mature than his 6 years suggested. Amelia patted the seat next to her. "I think you've already helped a lot, honey. You've given us something incredible to fight for." Lucas didn't sit down. Instead, he reached for her phone, which had been buzzing constantly since the morning. She raised an eyebrow, but he was already tapping away, dialing someone. "Who are you calling?" she asked, curious and a bit wary. "It's someone I think can help," Lucas said with surprising confidence. "He's a friend." Before Amelia could stop him, Lucas handed her the phone. "It's ringing." Amelia looked at the screen, her breath catching in her throat as she recognized the name. Avery Cross. Avery Cross was a name that hadn't crossed Amelia's mind in years. He had been a former colleague of Dr. Aldridge's and one of the brightest minds in the renewable energy sector before he'd left everything behind. A quiet genius who had vanished into the shadows of Silicon Valley, Cross had developed a reputation for being fiercely independent, even eccentric. Some whispered that he had turned his back on the industry because of its corruption and corporate greed, while others believed he had simply gone off the grid, working on his own secret projects. Whatever the case, he had dropped out of the public eye completely. Amelia hesitated for a moment before answering the phone. "Avery?" "Amelia," a familiar voice responded, low and calm. "It's been a while." The conversation that followed felt almost surreal. Avery Cross, of all people, had been keeping tabs on Lucas' work. He had been following the developments from the moment Lucas' invention had begun to attract public attention. He'd been watching EtherTech's aggressive tactics and had grown concerned. "I've seen the way things are going," Avery said, his voice steady but with a hint of urgency. "EtherTech isn't playing fair. They're not just trying to silence you. They're trying to control the entire energy industry. And if they succeed, everything you're working on will be buried under a mountain of red tape." Amelia felt a wave of relief mixed with confusion. "But how could you possibly know that? You've been out of the loop for years." "Let's just say," Avery replied with a chuckle, "I've been keeping an eye on the bigger players, even from the shadows. I've got resources, connections, people who believe in the same things you do." Amelia leaned forward, feeling her pulse quicken. "You're offering to help?" "Not just offering," Avery said. "I'm offering a partnership. I've been developing a network of clean energy advocates, hackers, engineers, people who believe in a decentralized future. We can fight back, Amelia. But we need to get ahead of EtherTech before they can bury you with their lawsuits and smear campaigns." Amelia couldn't help but be skeptical. Avery Cross had always been a loner, mysterious, almost mythic in his reclusiveness. But in that moment, his words resonated with her. The idea of going on the offensive, of having a force behind them that wasn't just about fighting for survival, but about actually winning, gave her a surge of hope she hadn't felt in weeks. "What do you have in mind?" she asked, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. Avery's plan was bold, even audacious. He had connections with whistleblowers inside EtherTech, engineers who had worked on similar energy systems, and financial experts who could trace the company's murky dealings with governments and regulatory bodies. His network was vast, and with their help, they could expose EtherTech's attempts to monopolize the energy sector, turning the public's growing support for Lucas and his technology into a full-fledged movement. "There's a risk, of course," Avery warned, his tone serious. "If we go public with this, we'll be attacking a corporate giant that's built its empire on bending the rules. They'll fight dirty. They might go after Lucas personally. But if we do this right, we can make sure EtherTech's strategy backfires. We have to make them the villains in this story." Amelia felt a fire rekindle in her chest. The more she heard, the more certain she became that this was the opportunity they had been waiting for. They could expose EtherTech for the corrupt, profit-driven monster it was. They could finally take control of the narrative. "I'm in," Amelia said without hesitation, "but we need to move fast. If EtherTech gets wind of this—" "We will," Avery interrupted. "I've already started planting the seeds. My team is already gathering the intel we need. You focus on Lucas. Get him ready. The moment we go public with this, we'll need his invention to be flawless." The next few days were a blur of action. Dr. Aldridge was cautiously optimistic, but reminded Amelia to stay grounded. "We have to be prepared for blowback. Avery's network might be able to get us the leverage we need, but it's not going to be easy." Amelia, Lucas, and Dr. Aldridge focused on perfecting the prototype. Every detail had to be flawless. The pressure was intense. They knew that if they made one mistake, they risked losing everything. But Amelia's resolve was stronger than ever. With Avery's help, They could not only win this fight but start a revolution in the energy sector. At the same time, Avery was gathering his team. Hackers who could expose EtherTech's financial misconduct, former insiders who were ready to testify about the company's unethical practices, and public relations experts who would help them control the message. They were preparing for a battle that would change everything. But as they made their final preparations, something told Amelia that they hadn't seen the full extent of the storm heading their way. The air in Boston felt thick with tension as Amelia, Lucas, and Dr. Aldridge made final preparations for the coming storm. The strategy was clear. They would release a carefully crafted exposé on EtherTech's corruption, using Avery Cross's network to back it up. They had all the evidence they needed: financial documents, testimonies from former EtherTech engineers, and damning internal emails showing how the company had been manipulating government contracts to keep independent energy startups like theirs down. But the closer they got to launching their offensive, the more they realized they weren't just up against a corporation. They were up against a well-oiled machine that would stop at nothing to protect its empire. The stakes had never been higher, and the sense of impending danger was inescapable. Amelia sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her, going over the last details of the media blitz that would kick things off. Lucas was in the living room, building his next set of energy designs, something far beyond his years in complexity and elegance. She couldn't help but smile at how far he'd come, how much he'd grown since that first moment when they had discovered the technology together. But the smile didn't last long. Her phone buzzed, and she saw the name of the caller. It was Avery. Amelia. Avery's voice came through the phone, low and urgent. "I need you to listen carefully." Amelia sat up straight, her heart beginning to race. "What is it? Is everything okay?" "There's been a breach," Avery said, his voice tight with concern. "One of my contacts in EtherTech just tipped me off. Someone from within the company has leaked information about our plans. They're already mobilizing. We've got less than 24 hours before they make their counterstrike." Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. "What does that mean?" "They're moving faster than we anticipated. They've already hired a team of corporate spies, people who specialize in getting ahead of these kinds of operations. They're going to try to discredit you and Lucas before you even have a chance to make your move." It was like the floor had been ripped out from under her. Amelia quickly scanned through her mind, trying to process the situation. They had been so careful, so strategic. How could they have been compromised already? But the cold reality hit her. They're going to play dirty. They have the resources, the connections, the power to squash us like a bug. "Are you sure about this?" Amelia asked, her voice shaking but determined. "Positive," Avery replied. "I've already pulled a few strings. We can't delay this any longer. We need to act fast, or EtherTech will destroy everything you've built. I'm sending you everything we have: documents, the contacts, the plan. Trust me, Amelia. If we don't strike first, we're finished." Amelia's grip tightened around the phone. "What do we do now?" "Go public," Avery said bluntly. "Get the exposé out there. Let the world see what they're doing. If they can't control the narrative, they'll lose the support of their investors. And we need to expose them before they get to you." The next several hours were a blur of action and urgency. Dr. Aldridge's team had already prepared a press release and video content that outlined the true origins of Lucas's invention and how EtherTech had been manipulating the market. Avery's network had already set up social media accounts, media contacts, and influencers ready to amplify the message. Amelia's heart pounded as she hit send on the email that would launch the exposé into the world. At the same time, Lucas was sitting beside her, his little hands on his tablet, looking up at her with wide eyes. "Mom?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Are we going to be okay?" Amelia blinked back tears as she took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "We're going to be more than okay. We're going to change the world." The first wave of backlash came swiftly. EtherTech's legal team was prepared for the exposé, but they were caught off guard by the intensity of the public reaction. The story went viral almost instantly, with tech blogs, renewable energy advocates, and independent journalists amplifying the message. The videos showing EtherTech's underhanded tactics, combined with the insider information Avery's team had provided, painted a damning picture of a corporation willing to go to any lengths to maintain control over the energy industry. But EtherTech wasn't going to give up without a fight. The first attack came through their PR machine. An open letter from Gregory Shaw himself, calling the accusations baseless and labeling the Thompsons as reckless opportunists trying to profit off a child's gimmick. They used Lucas's age against them, suggesting that the whole invention was a fluke or a publicity stunt that didn't deserve the attention it was getting. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Public support was swaying in their direction. Social media was flooded with hashtags like #StopEtherTech and #LucasTheGenius. Environmental groups were rallying behind the Thompsons, and a growing number of investors began distancing themselves from EtherTech, fearful of the damage the scandal would do to their portfolios. In response to the exposé, EtherTech didn't waste any time launching a counteroffensive. Within hours, they filed a series of lawsuits targeting both Amelia and Dr. Aldrich, accusing them of defamation and spreading false information about the company's activities. They also filed for a court injunction to prevent Lucas from showcasing his technology at upcoming environmental conferences, claiming that the patents were stolen and that Lucas's work was a violation of their intellectual property. But the most shocking move came when they filed a motion to have Lucas's invention permanently sealed by the court, claiming it was a threat to national security because of its potential to disrupt the global energy market. It was a move straight out of their playbook, throwing everything they had at the Thompsons in a desperate bid to regain control. But this time, they had underestimated the sheer force of the public outcry. The court case was only the beginning. As EtherTech worked its legal channels, they also launched a series of covert operations, trying to intimidate those who were supporting Lucas and the Thompsons. Avery's network had already begun to intercept suspicious emails and phone calls, which only added to the growing sense of unease. At the same time, Amelia could sense that they were no longer just up against a corporation. They were up against a system, a network of powerful players who had their hands in everything from energy regulation to the media to government contracts. Every time they pushed forward, it felt like there were 5 more obstacles waiting for them. But one thing was clear. They had to keep moving. They couldn't stop now. Not after everything they'd been through. Not after everything Lucas had sacrificed. Amelia gathered her team late one night in the apartment, their faces pale under the harsh light of the kitchen lamp. "They're trying to break us," she said, her voice sharp. "But we're not going down without a fight. We've come too far." Dr. Aldridge nodded, her face grim. "We need to stay ahead of them, Amelia. EtherTech won't stop until they've buried Lucas's work. But if we keep going, if we keep exposing the truth, we can win this." Lucas, sitting quietly at the table, suddenly spoke up. "We're not going to give up, right, Mom?" Amelia's heart swelled with pride as she looked at her son. "Never, sweetheart. We're not giving up. The battle enters its most dangerous phase yet. EtherTech, cornered and desperate, turns to an unexpected ally, one who could tip the scales in their favor. Will Lucas and his team be able to survive the final showdown, or will EtherTech succeed in silencing the truth once and for all? The following days felt like an unrelenting whirlwind. Amelia, Lucas, and Dr. Aldridge were constantly on the move, meeting with legal advisors, strategizing with Avery's team, and preparing for the public backlash that EtherTech was bound to launch next. Their every move was watched by 100 different eyes, and it seemed like the deeper they dug into the conspiracy, the more dangerous the waters became. But as the days passed, a new force seemed to be emerging, an unexpected ally who would change everything. It came in the form of an anonymous phone call that left Amelia both shaken and intrigued. It was late evening, and Amelia had just tucked Lucas into bed. Her mind raced with everything that had happened in the past few days, the countless sleepless nights, and the overwhelming sense that they were running out of time. The world was starting to turn its attention toward their struggle, but she knew that EtherTech wasn't going to let them go so easily. Her phone buzzed, startling her. Restricted number. Frowning, she picked up. "Hello," she said cautiously. There was a long pause, followed by a low, gravelly voice that made her heart skip a beat. "Amelia Thompson," the voice said, calm but deliberate. "I think we need to talk." She straightened, her breath catching in her throat. "Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching your progress," the voice responded, its tone unmistakably serious. "I've got information that could help you win this fight. But it won't come cheap." Amelia's mind raced. Who could this be? Another whistleblower? A journalist? But something in the voice struck her. It sounded familiar, like someone who knew her, but she couldn't place it. "What do you want?" Amelia asked, trying to mask her skepticism. "I want you to meet me," the voice said. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. in Boston. I'll send the location. You'll know where to find me. Bring your team. This isn't a conversation you want to miss." Before she could respond, the line went dead. The next morning, Amelia gathered herself and called Dr. Aldridge and Lucas into the small, dimly lit kitchen. They hadn't spoken much about the phone call yet, but Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Who could be reaching out to them in this way? "Someone called last night," Amelia said, looking at Dr. Aldridge, who had just arrived, looking disheveled but alert. "They have information, something we need to hear. They want to meet tomorrow in Boston." "Who was it?" Dr. Aldridge asked, her brow furrowed in concern. "What did they say?" "I don't know," Amelia replied. The voice sounded like someone who knows us, like they've been keeping an eye on us. "But they won't say much over the phone." Dr. Aldridge hesitated for a moment. "We should be cautious. We don't know who this person is or what their intentions are, but we can't ignore it. If they really do have something useful, it could change everything for us." "Agreed," Amelia said. "We'll go, but we have to be prepared for anything." The meeting location turned out to be an abandoned warehouse just outside of the city, an area that had once been a thriving industrial district, but now was little more than a ghost town. Amelia's instincts were on high alert as they drove through the empty streets. The sense of isolation was palpable, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Are you sure this is the place?" Dr. Aldridge asked, her voice laced with suspicion. She looked around, as if expecting someone to jump out from behind the crumbling buildings. "It's the address they gave me," Amelia replied, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "But stay alert." They parked in front of the warehouse, the old, rusted doors creaking in the wind. It was eerily quiet. Lucas, as always, was the first to speak up. "Mom, I don't like this. It feels wrong." Amelia smiled at him, trying to reassure him, though her own nerves were on edge. "I know, sweetheart, but we have to do this. We'll be fine." They stepped out of the car, moving cautiously toward the entrance. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the silence, and Amelia's mind kept racing. Who would contact us like this? What could they possibly know that could help us now? As they reached the large steel door, it creaked open slowly, revealing a dimly lit interior. Amelia squinted into the darkness, waiting for their mysterious visitor. And then, from the shadows, a figure stepped forward. It was a man, tall and imposing, dressed in a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He looked like someone out of a spy novel, someone who didn't want to be found. The man lowered his hat as he approached them, his face partially obscured. "Amelia Thompson," he said, his voice smooth and calm. "It's good to finally meet you in person." Amelia stiffened. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man gave her a small, knowing smile. "Let's just say I'm someone with a vested interest in seeing EtherTech taken down. They're not the only ones who've been keeping an eye on Lucas." At the mention of Lucas, the man's gaze shifted toward him, and there was an odd glint in his eyes, a mix of curiosity and respect. "Impressive work for someone so young," he said, his voice tinged with admiration. "I didn't think anyone would figure it out so quickly." Lucas, sensing the gravity of the conversation, spoke up. "Who are you really?" The man hesitated, then finally removed his hat, revealing a face that Amelia didn't immediately recognize. But there was something about him that stirred a memory. "You might know me better as Noah Carrington," he said, his tone low and deliberate. Amelia froze. Noah Carrington. The name hit her like a punch in the gut. Noah Carrington was one of the most elusive figures in the world of renewable energy. A former EtherTech executive who had disappeared years ago after a scandal involving mismanagement of resources and an insider trading investigation. His sudden departure had caused ripples through the industry, and his name had become synonymous with corporate corruption and deceit. But Amelia didn't expect to see him here, standing before her, offering to help them. "What do you want from us?" Amelia asked, her voice steady but wary. Noah's eyes darkened. "I want to see EtherTech go down. I've been trying to expose them for years, but I couldn't do it alone. I'm offering you everything I know, everything I've been collecting for the past decade. If you really want to take them down, you need me, and you need to move fast." Noah's offer was a game changer. He had inside information, top-secret documents, security footage, financial statements that would blow EtherTech's entire operation wide open. He had been working in the shadows for years, gathering evidence and waiting for the right moment to strike. But his reasons for staying hidden were just as personal as they were professional. EtherTech had tried to bury him after the scandal, discrediting him in every way possible. He had learned the hard way that going up against such a powerful corporation came with a heavy price. "I've been waiting for someone with the courage to take them on," Noah said, his voice low but determined. "Someone who can handle the pressure. That's you, Amelia. You have the public's trust. You have the innovation. Together, we can finally bring EtherTech to its knees." Amelia was torn. Noah Carrington was a wild card, someone who had disappeared for a reason. But the offer was too valuable to ignore. If what he said was true, this could be their ticket to taking down EtherTech for good. "We're listening," Amelia said, her voice steady. Noah smiled. "Then let's get to work." The weeks following the meeting with Noah Carrington were a blur of intense preparation. Amelia, Lucas, and Dr. Aldridge had thrown themselves into the task at hand, combing through the mountains of documents Noah had provided. The weight of the information was staggering, proof that EtherTech's corrupt practices ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. The company had manipulated government contracts, falsified energy efficiency data, and bribed officials to suppress emerging renewable energy solutions that threatened their monopoly. Noah's intel had already set a new course for their mission. They knew what had to be done. They had to release this damning evidence at the right moment, but it wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about building an unshakable case that would force the government and investors to act. However, as the days passed, Amelia began to feel the pressure, not just from EtherTech, but from the mounting tension within her own team. The stakes were higher than ever. She could sense that Noah wasn't just a powerful ally. He was also hiding something that made him far more dangerous than he let on. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that Noah Carrington wasn't being completely transparent. Every time she asked him more questions about his past, his sudden disappearance, his years of hiding, his motivations, he would deflect with a smooth, practiced answer. But she knew better than to take everything at face value. This was a man who had lived in the shadows for too long, and his reasons for coming forward could be just as complicated as the fight they were all in. One evening, after a long day of reviewing documents, Amelia found herself standing by the window, looking out over the Boston skyline. The weight of their mission hung heavy in the air, and she couldn't help but feel the isolation creeping in. She loved Lucas with all her heart, but the burden she carried was immense. Lucas was the key to everything, and she would do anything to protect him. But sometimes, it felt like the fight was consuming them all. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ringing of her phone. She glanced at the screen. It was Noah. "Amelia," he said when she answered, his voice clipped. "We need to talk. Now." Minutes later, Noah arrived at Amelia's apartment. He looked more agitated than she had ever seen him. His sharp eyes darted around the room as though he was trying to figure out who else was there. Amelia raised an eyebrow. "What's going on, Noah?" He took a deep breath before speaking. "I need you to understand something. EtherTech, they didn't just ruin my career. They ruined my life. They know what I've been trying to do, and they won't stop until they've silenced me for good. But that's not the worst part." Amelia's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" Noah's face hardened. "You need to know why I've been so secretive. EtherTech didn't just get rid of me. They made sure I could never work again. The reason I'm hiding, the reason I didn't come forward sooner, is because EtherTech's corruption runs deeper than just business dealings. They've been involved in something far darker, something I only found out about when I was in too deep." Amelia narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" Noah hesitated. "They've been experimenting with technology that goes far beyond energy. I don't know all the details, but I have pieces of evidence suggesting they were involved in research related to neurotechnology. There were talks about controlling minds, influencing behavior through artificial neural networks. EtherTech has been working with governments and military contractors to develop mind control devices disguised as advanced brain-computer interfaces. I thought I could expose them before they could launch it, but they came after me first. I had to disappear. Amelia's stomach twisted. Are you telling me that EtherTech was developing something that could control people's minds? Noah nodded gravely. Yes. It's more than just about energy or money. It's about power. True. Absolute control. And that's why they won't stop coming after you, Amelia. You and Lucas have something they can't afford to let exist. Lucas's technology could disrupt everything they've been building in secret. They won't let a 6-year-old boy stand in their way. Amelia stood frozen, processing everything Noah had just told her. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Mind control technology? It was beyond anything she could have imagined. But it made sense. It explained EtherTech's relentless pursuit of power, their willingness to bury anyone who got in their way, and their refusal to let the truth come out. She glanced over at Lucas, who had been quietly playing with his tablet in the corner of the room. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Her son, her beautiful, brilliant son, was at the center of something far larger and more dangerous than she had ever thought. If EtherTech truly had developed this kind of technology, Lucas's work could very well be the only thing standing in the way of their plans. But this new revelation also posed a terrifying question. What if Lucas had unknowingly stumbled upon the key to stopping them? Noah broke the silence. I can't stay hidden forever, Amelia. We need to go public with this. Now. But I can't do it without your help. If we wait too long, EtherTech will make their move, and it will be too late. Amelia's hands shook. She had never been more frightened in her life. But she also knew that this was the moment. They had to expose EtherTech, not just for their corporate greed, but for their attempts to control society itself. The consequences of failure were too great. I'll do whatever it takes, Amelia said, her voice steady. But we need to protect Lucas. We can't let them get to him. Noah's eyes flickered with a hint of something darker. That's exactly why we need to act fast. EtherTech already knows you're a threat, Amelia. They'll stop at nothing to destroy everything you've worked for. But if we expose them now, we might still have a chance. The plan was set into motion. With the additional intel Noah had provided, the Thompsons, Dr. Aldridge, and their team worked feverishly to put together the final pieces of the puzzle. The world needed to know the truth about EtherTech's corruption, about their mind control experiments, and about how Lucas's technology was the only thing that could stop them. But as they prepared for the exposé, Amelia knew they were running out of time. EtherTech wasn't going to sit back and let them dismantle their empire. The battle was going to get even uglier, and the stakes were now higher than ever. But she also knew one thing for certain. They couldn't back down. The fight had become something far bigger than just a corporation versus a small family. It was about freedom, autonomy, and the future of the world itself. The plan was to take everything public, every scrap of evidence, every file, every recorded conversation, and every document. They would expose EtherTech's deep ties to government agencies, their involvement in illegal neural technologies, and their ruthless campaign to eliminate competition. But Amelia knew they had to make the first move before EtherTech did. They couldn't wait any longer. As they finalized the details, Amelia turned to Noah. Are you sure you're ready for this? You're putting yourself at risk too. Noah met her gaze without hesitation. I've been living in the shadows for too long. It's time to bring them into the light. Amelia squeezed Lucas's hand and looked around at her team. This was it, the beginning of the end for EtherTech. They were about to make their move, and nothing would ever be the same. But as they prepared to launch their final assault, one question remained. Would they survive long enough to see it through? It was the moment they had been preparing for. Amelia, Lucas, Dr. Aldridge, and their team stood on the precipice of everything they had worked for, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The documents were ready, the evidence was in place, and the world was about to find out the horrifying truth about EtherTech. But as Amelia stared at her computer screen, a cold sweat prickling at her brow, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Are you sure this is the right time? Dr. Aldridge asked, her voice a quiet whisper as they gathered around the table in the makeshift command center. We've all been working so hard to get to this point, but are we ready for what comes next? Amelia glanced at the clock. They had set the release time for 9 a.m. sharp, an hour from now. They couldn't delay. EtherTech was already on the move, and if they hesitated even a moment longer, it could be too late. We don't have a choice, Amelia replied, trying to keep her voice steady. If we wait any longer, they'll bury us. The world has to know what they've been doing. The mind control technology, the cover-ups, the manipulations. We have the truth, and we can't let them stop us now. But even as she said those words, doubt lingered. EtherTech had the power, the influence, and the resources to fight back in ways they couldn't possibly anticipate. And the truth was, even if they exposed everything, would it be enough? Would anyone believe them? The team worked in silence, their eyes glued to their screens as the clock ticked down. Lucas, ever the curious and clever boy, hovered near the table, watching the adults with a mixture of determination and concern. He didn't understand all the details, but he knew one thing. They were about to do something big. Amelia couldn't help but glance at him, a twinge of guilt pulling at her heart. Lucas was just a child, and yet he was at the center of this storm. But she also knew that if they were to win, it would be because of his brilliance, his invention. The very thing EtherTech had been desperate to suppress. The timer on the computer hit 0. Amelia pressed the button. The expose went live. The world watched as the massive leak spread like wildfire across social media platforms, news outlets, and government channels. The files, the documents, the images, all the damning evidence against EtherTech were suddenly out in the open for everyone to see. The first reaction was shock. People didn't know what to believe at first. Such an enormous, systematic conspiracy was hard to comprehend. But as journalists began to verify the documents and investigators dug into the claims, the truth became undeniable. EtherTech had been orchestrating a vast, multi-layered operation to suppress renewable energy solutions, manipulate government contracts, and, most terrifying of all, develop advanced mind control technologies. For the first time, the world began to see EtherTech not as a leader in clean energy, but as a dangerous force that had been exploiting not just people's trust, but their very minds. It didn't take long for EtherTech to react. Within hours, the company issued a public statement, calling the expose a series of baseless, defamatory claims that were designed to ruin the reputation of a global leader in technology and sustainability. They denied the mind control research entirely, dismissing the documents as forgeries and fabrications by disgruntled former employees. But the damage was done. The public, and more importantly, investors, were beginning to question the company's integrity. EtherTech's stock began to dip, and the media frenzy only added fuel to the fire. People were demanding answers. However, this was far from over. EtherTech wasn't just going to let this slide. Amelia knew that. The company had too much to lose, and their response would be swift, ruthless, and likely violent. She had seen what they were capable of, and this was just the beginning. As the media storm raged on, the Thompsons' world took a sudden, terrifying turn. It was late that night when Amelia received an unexpected call. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. Amelia Thompson, the voice sneered, "You've made a grave mistake." Her blood ran cold. "You have no idea what you're up against," the voice continued. EtherTech doesn't just control markets. They control governments, industries, and now, thanks to you, they control everything that matters. You think you can just expose us and walk away? Think again. Before Amelia could respond, the line went dead. Her hands shook as she dropped the phone. She turned to Dr. Aldridge, who had been sitting nearby, her eyes wide with concern. "What was that?" Dr. Aldridge asked, her voice quivering. "They know we've made our move," Amelia said, her voice strained, "and they're not going to let us get away with it." The team's worst fears were beginning to materialize. EtherTech wasn't just a corporation. It was a shadowy, all-powerful entity that had its hands in far more than anyone had realized. And now, it seemed they would stop at nothing to destroy those who dared to expose them. The next few days were a blur of panic and fear. EtherTech's retaliatory strike was swift and brutal. Their legal team filed multiple lawsuits against Amelia, Lucas, and Dr. Aldridge, accusing them of fraud, defamation, and conspiracy. Public opinion, which had initially been sympathetic, quickly turned as EtherTech's army of PR professionals flooded the airwaves with counter-narratives, questioning the authenticity of the documents and accusing Amelia of being part of an elaborate smear campaign. But the real danger wasn't in the courtrooms, it was in the shadows. Amelia began to notice strange, unmarked cars parked outside her home, and the sense of being watched grew stronger with each passing day. She wasn't just under legal attack, she was being stalked. Then, one evening, the unthinkable happened. It happened when they least expected it. Amelia and Dr. Aldridge had been working late, reviewing new information that had surfaced, when they heard the sound of the front door creaking open. Amelia's heart leapt into her throat. "Lucas," she called, her voice tight with panic. "Lucas." But there was no answer. Frantically, she rushed down the hallway, her mind racing. The house was eerily quiet, too quiet. And then, as she passed the living room, she froze. The door to the back porch was wide open. A sickening realization hit her. "No!" Amelia shouted, her voice breaking. "No, no, no!" She bolted outside, but the dark night swallowed her. There was no sign of Lucas, no trace of him. A chill ran down her spine. They'd taken him. Amelia's world fell apart as she realized the terrifying truth. EtherTech had escalated things beyond a corporate battle. They were going after her son, the only thing that had the potential to destroy them. Dr. Aldridge's face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. "We have to go after them," she said, her voice firm. "We can't let them take Lucas. We can't let them win." Amelia nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. They had gone too far. Now, it was personal. No matter the cost, no matter the danger, she would stop at nothing to get her son back. And if it meant bringing EtherTech down once and for all, then that was exactly what she would do. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in the middle of the living room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold night air swirled around her, the chilling breeze biting at her skin as she ran through the scenario in her mind. EtherTech had her son. They had taken Lucas. And now, they were likely hiding him somewhere, waiting for her next move. Dr. Aldridge was at the front door, frantically dialing numbers, trying to reach anyone who could help them. But Amelia knew it wasn't going to be that easy. EtherTech wasn't just any corporation. They were a well-oiled machine, with resources, connections, and power that could wipe out anyone who dared to cross them. They had already proven that by going after her family. "I can't reach anyone," Dr. Aldridge said, her voice shaking. "They're covering their tracks too well." Amelia clenched her fists, trying to steady herself. The situation felt like a nightmare, but it was all too real. EtherTech had taken Lucas to stop them, from exposing the full extent of their crimes. But that wasn't going to happen, not if Amelia had anything to say about it. "We can't wait for someone else to help us," Amelia said, her voice ice-cold with determination. "We have to act fast. They won't keep Lucas for long. They'll know we're coming for him, and the longer we wait, the harder it'll be to get him back." Dr. Aldridge nodded grimly. "Then we need a plan, and we need it now." The team spent the next few hours meticulously planning their next steps. Amelia knew they couldn't afford to make mistakes. EtherTech was likely keeping Lucas in one of their high-security facilities, somewhere heavily guarded, probably in a location they could easily isolate and control. If they were going to rescue Lucas, they had to get in, retrieve him, and get out undetected. But the bigger question was how. "We have to track them," Dr. Aldridge said. "They'll have moved him by now, but we might be able to use his tech, the system he's built, to find out where they're holding him." Amelia nodded. "We need to hack into EtherTech's internal network and get their surveillance data. That's the only way we'll know where they've taken him." The thought of hacking into one of the most secure networks in the world was daunting, but they didn't have much of a choice. Lucas's technology, the very thing EtherTech feared, might be their only lifeline. "We'll need someone who can get into their systems without getting caught," Dr. Aldridge continued, her voice steady. "We also need to be prepared for the worst. EtherTech will be expecting us to try something." Amelia's mind raced as she looked over at Noah Carrington, who had joined them earlier that night. He had been a valuable ally, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his involvement in this fight than met the eye. Still, now was not the time for questions. "Noah," Amelia said, her voice calm but firm, "I need you to get us into their system. You've got the contacts, the knowledge. Can you do it?" Noah hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I can get us in, but it won't be easy. EtherTech is more than just a tech company. They have entire divisions dedicated to cybersecurity, and they've been on high alert ever since your expose went live. But I can bypass most of their firewalls, if we're lucky." "Then we do it," Amelia said. "We don't have time to waste." Time was running out. Amelia knew every second spent away from Lucas was a second he was slipping further into their clutches. She had no idea what EtherTech was planning, whether they were trying to manipulate him, use him for their own purposes, or something far darker. But she couldn't afford to think about that. "We move in an hour," Amelia said as she looked at her team. "Lucas is counting on us. We're not leaving without him." They gathered their gear, preparing for what would surely be one of the most dangerous missions of their lives. As the clock ticked down, Amelia's mind was on one thing and one thing only: getting Lucas back. The operation began just after midnight. Noah led them to a secure location outside of Boston, a nondescript warehouse where they would set up a temporary base of operations. The team worked in silence, focused on the task ahead. Noah was already hacking into EtherTech's network, bypassing security protocols with an efficiency that stunned Amelia. She had never seen him work so quickly, so purposefully. But there was still a problem. Even if they could track Lucas, they would need to get to him without alerting EtherTech's security. That meant stealth, precision, and a solid exit strategy. "I've got it," Noah said, looking up from his laptop, his expression grim. "They've moved him. I can see the internal logs. He's been taken to a facility in the heart of Boston, just outside the city center. It's a classified research lab. Security is tight." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. Boston. It was closer than she thought, but that also meant it would be harder to infiltrate. "How do we get in?" she asked, trying to keep her nerves in check. Noah tapped a few keys, bringing up a series of blueprints for the facility. "We'll need to go in through the back. There's a maintenance tunnel, underground access. It'll bypass most of the security measures, but we'll have to move fast. Once we're inside, it's a matter of finding Lucas before they have a chance to move him again." Amelia nodded. "Let's do it." The team drove in silence, each of them steeling themselves for what lay ahead. The streets of Boston were eerily empty at this hour, and as they neared the facility, Amelia's stomach twisted in knots. This was the moment. There was no turning back now. Noah led them to a small, inconspicuous building on the outskirts of the facility. They slipped through the shadows, staying low to avoid detection. The maintenance tunnel was hidden behind a set of metal doors, guarded by only a few cameras and motion detectors. Noah worked quickly, overriding the security system with ease. The door clicked open, and they were inside. As they moved through the dimly lit corridors, Amelia felt the weight of every decision pressing down on her. They were in enemy territory now. They had to be swift and silent. After what felt like hours of crawling through narrow tunnels, they finally reached a security checkpoint. Noah paused, studying the cameras. "I can disable the surveillance feeds," he whispered, "but we'll need a distraction to get past the guards." Amelia's pulse quickened. A distraction. The plan was risky, but it was their only shot. With Noah's quick thinking, they set the plan into motion. Dr. Aldridge caused a small electrical malfunction in one of the facility's power systems, triggering a temporary blackout. As the guards scrambled to respond, Amelia and her team slipped past them, making their way deeper into the heart of the facility. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they found him. Lucas was locked in a small, sterile room, surrounded by high-tech equipment. His eyes widened when he saw them, but there was no time for words. They had to move quickly. "Mom!" Lucas cried, his voice shaking with both relief and fear. They tried to make me do things I don't understand." Amelia's heart broke, but there was no time for explanations. She rushed forward, hugging him tightly. "We're getting you out of here, Lucas. I promise." But just as they were about to leave, the facility's alarm blared, echoing through the halls. EtherTech knew they had been infiltrated. "We have to move now," Amelia shouted. The alarms echoed through the facility like a terrifying warning of what was to come. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as she clutched Lucas's hand, pulling him along with a force that felt almost primal. Her mind raced, processing everything in a split second. EtherTech knows we're here. This is no longer a simple rescue mission. It's a fight for survival. "Noah, can you get us out of here?" Amelia shouted, her voice barely rising above the blaring alarms. Noah didn't respond at first, but his fingers were flying over his tablet, trying to override security systems with the same precision he'd demonstrated earlier. "I'm working on it," he gritted through clenched teeth. "There's a back exit we can take, but it's on the other side of the facility. We'll need to move fast." Amelia didn't hesitate. She turned to Dr. Aldridge, who was now flanking the group, her face set with grim determination. "Dr. Aldridge, keep an eye out for anything suspicious. We can't afford any surprises." Dr. Aldridge gave a sharp nod. "We've got this." They moved swiftly, their footsteps heavy in the silence that followed the first round of blaring alarms. The tension was unbearable, each turn, each step drawing them closer to the security measures that were no doubt about to lock down the facility completely. Amelia felt a gnawing anxiety at the back of her mind. Would they make it out? As they rounded a corner, the first group of EtherTech's security guards appeared in front of them, blocking their way. "Hold it!" one of them shouted, reaching for his weapon. Instinct kicked in. Amelia grabbed Lucas, pulling him to the side just as Dr. Aldridge fired a quick shot from a concealed pistol. The guard dropped to the floor, unconscious, but the loud sound of the gunshot reverberated through the hall, only increasing the pressure. "Go! Go!" Noah shouted, turning on his heel and sprinting down the hallway. Amelia barely had time to react before they were off again, running as fast as they could, Lucas in tow. The facility seemed to stretch endlessly before them, hallways and doors flanking them on all sides. The next round of guards appeared, but this time, they didn't try to stop them with force. Instead, they raised their weapons. Amelia's stomach twisted as she saw the guns aimed at them. But there was no time for hesitation. Dr. Aldridge fired another round. This time, the guard didn't fall. Instead, a loud explosion erupted from the opposite side of the hallway, throwing them all off balance. The walls shook, the ceiling cracked, and for a moment, Amelia couldn't hear anything but the ringing in her ears. "Move!" Noah screamed. It was chaos. The lights flickered as the explosion caused a massive power surge, knocking out some of the facility's security systems and temporarily disabling the cameras. That gave them the upper hand. They bolted forward, rounding another corner just as the hallway erupted into flames behind them. The tunnel to the exit was only a few meters away. As they reached the maintenance tunnel, Amelia thought they might make it. They were close. Lucas was alive. They were this close to freedom. But then, an unexpected sound stopped them cold. The screech of a metal door sliding open. EtherTech's elite security team, an entire squad of heavily armed guards, poured into the hallway ahead of them. These weren't the standard guards they had faced so far. These were the real deal. They were too well organized, too prepared for this kind of assault. "Freeze!" one of them shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. Amelia didn't think twice. She shoved Lucas behind her, pushing him into the shadows of the tunnel, while the others raised their weapons in defense. But even she knew it wasn't enough. "We're surrounded," Dr. Aldridge muttered, checking her pistol's chamber. "This is it." A slow, grim smile crept onto Noah's face. "Maybe not." He fumbled through a small pouch on his belt and pulled out a small device. "What's that?" Amelia asked, eyeing him suspiciously. "EMP," Noah said, his smile widening. "Should give us a few seconds of chaos to slip through their net." He activated the device, and the world around them seemed to glitch. The lights flickered, security alarms went silent, and the facility's central control system briefly went down. "Move now," Noah yelled. They ran for their lives. But the chaos didn't last long. The EMP caused a temporary system crash, but it didn't disable the guards. The team was still in grave danger. They sprinted through the darkened tunnel, their steps heavy with the sound of pursuit just behind them. "We're not out of the woods yet," Amelia panted, adrenaline coursing through her veins. As they neared the exit, they heard voices. Two of EtherTech's security officers were ahead, blocking their path. Without warning, a sharp voice echoed out, causing Amelia to freeze. "Amelia!" She whirled around, her pulse spiking. The voice came from behind them. Noah had stopped running. "Noah?" Amelia said, her breath caught in her throat. What are you doing?" Noah stood facing them, a strange, almost defeated look in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but I can't let you take Lucas with you." Amelia's mind spun. What was he talking about? "Noah, you're with us. What are you?" The glint of a gun appeared in his hand, hidden at his side, and her stomach dropped. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Don't try to stop me," he said. "You don't understand. I'm part of the reason all this is happening. I was working with EtherTech before any of this. They had plans for me, for Lucas, for all of you." Amelia felt her legs turn to jelly. "What do you mean?" "I was a key part of their algorithm project, how to track, how to manipulate, how to control Lucas's abilities, his technology. It was never meant to help humanity. I made sure of that." A cold, bitter laugh escaped him, and Amelia felt her world begin to collapse. Noah, the one person they had trusted, had been an operative for EtherTech all along. He wasn't helping them escape. He was setting them up for a trap. "You were always so clever, Amelia," Noah continued, his eyes dark and unfeeling. "But you were never meant to win this fight." Amelia took a step back, her mind scrambling for answers. It was all a lie. She couldn't believe it. "So what? You want us to just walk into their hands? Just like that?" "It's already too late," Noah said. "They'll find you, and Lucas, well, he's already theirs." The sound of footsteps echoed behind them again, this time heavier, faster. It wasn't just the guards. It was EtherTech's elite forces, and they were closing in. "Noah, don't do this," Amelia said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Please, think about what you're doing." But Noah's expression didn't change. He raised his weapon. Before anyone could react, the world exploded into chaos. Amelia's heart was in her throat as Noah's weapon slowly rose in front of them. The tunnel felt like it was closing in, the air thick with tension, and the silence between them stretched painfully long. She couldn't believe what was happening. Noah, their ally, their friend, he had been working for EtherTech all along. And now, he was holding them at gunpoint. "You're making a mistake, Noah," Amelia said, her voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and desperation. "We can still get out of here. You don't have to do this." But Noah's expression was cold, detached. His eyes no longer held the warmth they once did, only the steely resolve of someone who had made their choice. "You don't understand," Noah said, his voice flat. "You were never supposed to get this far. EtherTech gave me the tools to build a better world, one where we don't have to hide from the truth. But you're standing in the way of progress." "Progress?" Amelia's voice cracked with outrage. "By sacrificing a child? By hurting everyone who stands in your way?" He didn't flinch. "It's bigger than you, Amelia. It's bigger than Lucas. You never understood the stakes." Amelia felt the weight of his betrayal crash down on her. She had trusted him. She had counted on him. And now, here he was, pointing a gun at them as if they were nothing more than obstacles in his path. But she wasn't about to give up. Not like this. Not when they were so close to saving Lucas. "Lucas," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Get behind me." Lucas's small, terrified face looked up at her, but he didn't hesitate. He crouched low, moving behind her as Amelia stepped forward, her gaze locked on Noah. "You're wrong," she said. "You think EtherTech's plan is the right one, but you've been blind to everything they've been hiding. It's not progress. It's control. They don't want a better world. They want a world where people like Lucas are used as weapons." Noah didn't react, but the briefest flicker of doubt crossed his face. It was almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Amelia seized the opportunity. With one swift movement, she lunged forward, knocking the gun from his hand before he could react. The weapon skittered across the floor, and in the next moment, Dr. Aldridge sprang into action, grabbing the gun and pointing it at Noah. "Noah," Dr. Aldridge said, her voice low and dangerous, "you've made a grave mistake." Noah raised his hands in surrender, but the look in his eyes, an emotionless mask, remained. "You don't understand," he repeated, his voice tinged with regret. "I didn't have a choice. You wouldn't have understood my reasoning." "We don't need to," Amelia said, her voice firm. "You betrayed us. You betrayed Lucas. And now, we'll take care of him together." Noah was disarmed, but the situation was far from resolved. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the tunnel, closer now, faster. Amelia could hear the low hum of EtherTech's security personnel as they moved to lock down the facility. They had no time to waste. "We need to go now," Dr. Aldridge said, her eyes scanning the tunnel for a way out. Noah said nothing. His betrayal hung between them like a dark cloud, but Amelia couldn't afford to linger. She turned to Lucas, her hand gripping his tightly. "Let's move," she ordered. They ran as quickly as they could, the exit just ahead. But Amelia knew the real danger wasn't over. EtherTech had their sights set on Lucas, and nothing would stop them from going after him. Not Noah. Not the security forces. Nothing. Noah trailed behind, a shadow of his former self. It was clear that he wasn't going to help them, but for the moment, he wasn't an immediate threat. They had to focus on getting out of the facility alive. The maintenance tunnel led them toward the back exit, a narrow doorway that led into a loading dock area. From there, they could reach the underground parking garage, where a car was waiting to take them to safety. But as they neared the exit, Amelia froze. A small, nearly imperceptible figure stood blocking the doorway, watching them with quiet intensity. It was an EtherTech officer, female, slender, and dressed in full tactical gear. She didn't move, but there was something about her presence that made the hairs on the back of Amelia's neck stand up. "You won't make it out," the officer said softly, her voice betraying no emotion. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She had seen this woman before. She was one of the top agents of EtherTech, someone who had orchestrated several covert operations. "How do you know us?" Amelia demanded, her voice low. The officer smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "You don't remember me? That's unfortunate. I was there when you first exposed EtherTech's corruption. You made quite an impression. But now it's time for all of this to end." Without warning, the officer reached into her jacket, pulling out a sleek device that glowed with an eerie, neon blue light. Amelia's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" she demanded. "An EMP, the officer said with a smirk. "The same kind your little friend used earlier. Only this one has a bit more firepower." Amelia's heart sank. "You won't get away with this." The officer didn't respond. Instead, she clicked a button on the device. There was a sharp, high-pitched noise, louder than before. The tunnel around them flickered as the power surged, and in an instant, the world plunged into complete darkness. The darkness was total. For a split second, no one moved, no one spoke. Amelia could hear nothing except the frantic thudding of her own heartbeat in her ears. She tried to steady herself, but the weight of the situation crashed down on her with every passing second. Then, a single voice pierced through the silence. "Go." It was Dr. Aldridge. Amelia didn't hesitate. She grabbed Lucas's hand and pushed forward, stumbling in the dark. She couldn't see, couldn't hear, but she knew they had to move. Every second in that facility was one too many. Suddenly, the tunnel lit up again. Bright, harsh fluorescent lights flickered on, illuminating their surroundings. And then, the sound of boots, rushing footsteps, echoed down the corridor. EtherTech's security was closing in, and they weren't the only ones. Amelia's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a blackout. This was a strategic move. They had been outsmarted. A team of EtherTech's elite forces appeared at the far end of the tunnel, armed and ready. They blocked the exit, weapons drawn. Amelia felt a chill sweep over her. But they weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. With a sharp breath, Amelia drew her own weapon, and Dr. Aldridge followed suit. Noah stood in the shadows, still seemingly paralyzed by what he had done. "Run!" Dr. Aldridge yelled. Before Amelia could make a move, Lucas tugged at her sleeve, his face pale. "Mom, we can't just leave him." Amelia looked back at Noah, his face unreadable, but she couldn't afford to wait for him to make up his mind. She pulled Lucas toward the exit, her mind racing. The sound of gunfire broke the air, deafening, as the Ether Tech forces charged forward. Amelia and the others dove into the fray, dodging bullets, finding cover as they fought to survive. They were almost there. The exit was within reach. The room exploded in chaos. Amelia's breath came in short, shallow gasps as she ducked behind a reinforced metal pillar, pulling Lucas down beside her. The sound of gunfire echoed off the walls, ricocheting around them in a deafening frenzy. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, her fingers clenched tightly around the weapon she had only just started to trust. "This is it, isn't it?" Lucas whispered, his voice shaking. "No," Amelia said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "We're getting out of here, Lucas. We will." But the reality of the situation was harsh. Ether Tech's elite forces, fully equipped and ruthlessly efficient, were closing in fast. They had the advantage now. Everything was rigged in their favor. The EMP had crippled their escape route, and every exit was locked down tight. Their only hope was the dark tunnel leading further into the complex, but it was heavily guarded, and they'd have to fight their way through to get there. Amelia peeked around the corner. She saw Dr. Aldridge take cover behind another pillar, her pistol aimed at a group of advancing guards. She fired a quick, controlled burst, taking down one of them with deadly accuracy. But there were too many. The guards moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, working in tandem to flush them out. Noah, still standing at the back of the room, seemed to be in some kind of trance. He hadn't moved, his eyes distant, lost in a swirl of his own betrayal. Amelia felt a pang of anger and disbelief. How could he be so cold? How could he have done this to us? The answer came quickly, though. He never believed in us. Not really. He'd seen himself as a tool, a means to an end. But that didn't change the fact that they were stuck here, facing impossible odds. "Amelia." Dr. Aldridge's voice cut through her thoughts. "We need a plan. We're getting boxed in here." Amelia nodded, her mind racing. There was no way they could fight their way out. Not without losing someone. They had to do something quick. "Lucas," she said, turning to the boy, "I need you to focus. You've done this before. You can make a way for us." Lucas swallowed hard, his wide eyes staring up at her with fear. He nodded, though his voice trembled. "Okay, I'll try. But I don't know if I can do it, not like last time." "I know you can," Amelia said, her voice soft but insistent. "I believe in you. You've got this." Lucas closed his eyes, his small hands trembling as he reached out. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, a low, vibrating pulse. Amelia could see the faint shimmer of blue light forming around Lucas's fingers. It was almost like he was reaching into the very fabric of the air itself, pulling at something unseen. Suddenly, the lights flickered, once, twice, before they went out entirely. The entire room plunged into darkness. For a moment, everything was silent. The gunfire stopped. The shouting ceased. Amelia strained her ears, trying to hear any movement. But there was nothing. Then, just as quickly as the lights went out, an explosion of light filled the room. A burst of energy so bright it was blinding. "Stay down," Dr. Aldridge shouted, and Amelia instinctively dropped to the ground, covering Lucas as best as she could. A ripple of power surged from Lucas, his small body glowing with an ethereal light, and the air around him seemed to warp, like the very walls of the complex were bending under the weight of his power. The guards ahead flinched back, their guns falling from their hands, as if the air itself was alive with the force of his energy. Amelia could feel the change, a weight lifting from her chest as the atmosphere around them grew heavier with possibility. But she knew it wasn't enough. This wasn't just some random burst. Lucas's power had a purpose. In the distance, a low rumble of machinery hummed to life. A series of thick metal doors that had previously been locked down began to slide open, one by one. "Get moving," Dr. Aldridge ordered. "Go." Amelia didn't hesitate. She grabbed Lucas's hand, pulling him forward, knowing they couldn't waste another second. The light from Lucas's power dimmed slightly, but it was enough to light their way through the darkened hallway. They rushed through the newly opened doors, barely avoiding another wave of guards as they scrambled into the next level of the facility. The entire area felt more like a labyrinth than a structure. Endless corridors stretched in all directions, with no clear path to safety. "Where are we going?" Lucas asked, his voice strained. "Just keep moving," Amelia replied, her voice filled with urgency. "We're almost out of here." But just as they made it to the next corner, a loud voice cut through the silence, an unmistakable voice that made Amelia's blood run cold. "Stop right there." She froze, her body tensing as she turned to face the new threat. Standing at the other end of the corridor was a tall, imposing figure, Etherteka's commander, the very person who had orchestrated their downfall from the start. He was flanked by two heavily armed guards, their weapons raised and aimed directly at them. "No more running," the commander said, a cruel smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You've made it this far. But now, you will face the consequences." Amelia clenched her fists, her mind racing. There was no way out, not this time. The Ethertech commander had them cornered, and they were running out of options. But then, something strange happened. The commander's confident expression faltered for just a split second. It was barely noticeable, but Amelia caught it. A flicker of hesitation, a crack in his armor. And it wasn't just the commander. Behind him, the two guards looked uneasy, as though they were questioning their orders. "I told you this was inevitable," the commander said, his voice growing colder. "The future is ours, Amelia. You've seen what Lucas can do. He's the key to unlocking the next phase of evolution. And you're standing in our way. You forced us to move faster than we planned. But this ends here." Amelia's gaze locked onto the commander. "You don't understand, do you? Lucas isn't some tool to be used. He's a person, a child. You can't just control him." The commander's lips curled into a mockery of a smile. "You're wrong. He's not a child. He's a weapon, a force of nature. And you've already seen a glimpse of what he's capable of. It's just the beginning." Etherteka's plan was always to mold him into the ultimate weapon. And now he's going to help us reshape the world. "No," Amelia whispered, her breath catching in her throat. "I won't let you." But just as the commander stepped forward, preparing to give the order to fire, Lucas stepped in front of Amelia. "No," Lucas said, his voice filled with calm defiance. "I'm not a weapon." The light from Lucas's body flared brighter, and the very air around him seemed to crackle with raw energy. The commander's eyes widened in shock as Lucas's power began to surge again, this time with purpose. The walls trembled, and the ground beneath their feet vibrated as if it were alive, reacting to the force of his will. "You can't control me," Lucas continued, his voice steady now, growing stronger with every word. "I'll never be your weapon." For a moment, everything stood still. The commander's face twisted into a mask of frustration and rage as he realized the truth. Lucas was more than they could ever hope to control. But then, in a split second, something shifted in Lucas. His body seemed to glow brighter, and the energy around him coiled into a tight, focused beam of power. "Run!" Lucas shouted, his voice full of desperation. "Get out of here!" Amelia didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed Lucas's hand and bolted for the exit, the force of Lucas's energy creating a protective shield around them as they ran. The air hummed with power, and the walls trembled with every step they took. The commander's voice followed them, but it was distant now, lost in the chaos. "You can't outrun destiny," he yelled, his voice tinged with fury. But Amelia didn't stop. They weren't running from destiny. They were creating their own. The underground tunnels seemed endless. Amelia's feet pounded against the cold, metal floors as she and Lucas ran, the echo of their footsteps bouncing off the walls. The oppressive darkness was broken only by the faint glow of Lucas's energy, which illuminated the path ahead. His small hand was firmly clasped in hers, his breathing shallow and fast. But there was a new determination in his eyes, something fierce and resolute. Behind them, the shouts of Etherteka's forces grew faint, but Amelia knew it wouldn't be long before they regrouped. They had to move quickly, or they would be trapped again. We're almost there, Lucas, Amelia said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. Just a little further. Lucas nodded, but Amelia could see the strain on his face. The power he had unleashed was taking its toll on him, even though he tried to hide it. She couldn't ignore the way his body trembled with exhaustion, how his small shoulders slumped with each step. It was clear that whatever force he had tapped into was draining him. "We'll get out," she repeated, more to herself than to Lucas. "We have to get out." But the harsh truth gnawed at her. Even if they escaped this time, EtherTech would never stop hunting them. And as long as Lucas's abilities were out in the open, they would never be safe. Suddenly, Lucas stumbled, his breath catching in his throat. Amelia's grip tightened around his hand, but he pulled back weakly, his small face pale. I can't," Lucas gasped, his voice hoarse. "I can't go anymore. It hurts, Mom." Amelia's heart shattered at the sound of his voice, laced with so much fear and pain. She knelt down in front of him, forcing herself to stay calm, to think. Stay calm. Stay calm. "Lucas, listen to me," she said, her hands gently cupping his face. "You don't have to do this alone. I'm right here, okay? We're in this together." "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." "You didn't hurt anyone," Amelia said fiercely. "You were just trying to protect us. You didn't ask for this. You're not a weapon, Lucas. You're my son. You're the one who's going to change the world for the better, not EtherTech." Lucas nodded slowly, his breathing evening out a little, but he still looked weak. She knew they didn't have time for a pause. EtherTech was still after them, and the longer they waited, the more likely it was they would be found. "We're going to keep going, okay?" Amelia said, standing and offering her hand. "You can do this. Just a little further." Lucas nodded again, taking her hand. But he still moved slowly, his steps faltering as they continued down the narrow passage. Amelia could see the toll it was taking on him, but there was no turning back now. They had to get to the surface. They turned another corner, and the tunnel ahead began to widen. Amelia could hear voices now, low, urgent whispers, but it wasn't EtherTech. She froze, pulling Lucas closer to her as she squinted into the gloom. "Who's there?" Amelia called softly, trying to keep her voice steady. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, then the sound of footsteps approaching, cautious but steady. "Amelia," a voice called, a familiar one. Amelia's heart leaped. "Jace." Out of the shadows stepped Jace, his dark hair messy, his clothes dirty and torn. His face was grim, but there was relief in his eyes when he saw her and Lucas. "I knew you were alive," Jace said, his voice hoarse. "I saw the explosion. I thought—" "We'll talk later," Amelia interrupted, her mind racing. "Right now, we need to get out of here. EtherTech is after us. They'll be here any second." Jace nodded quickly, glancing over his shoulder. "I know a way out. Follow me." Amelia didn't hesitate. They couldn't afford to waste any time. She took Lucas's hand again, urging him to follow Jace as he led them through the winding tunnels. "I thought you were with EtherTech," Amelia said as they moved quickly through the darkened corridors. "I was," Jace replied, his voice tight, "but I couldn't do it anymore. They were using me, just like they were using you and Lucas. I couldn't keep pretending to be part of that." Amelia's mind raced. Jace had been working for EtherTech? It felt like a lifetime ago when they had been friends, all of them in it together. But now, nothing was what it seemed. "So you've been helping us?" she asked, trying to piece it all together. Jace nodded, his eyes hard. "You're not the only one who's had enough of them. I've been working with some people inside EtherTech, people who want to take them down. We've been planning an escape route, but time's running out." Amelia barely processed his words. She could see the exit ahead, a faint glow of daylight cutting through the tunnel's end. But the moment she reached it, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the passage behind them. They were close. "We don't have much time," Jace warned, looking over his shoulder. "Come on." Amelia pushed Lucas ahead of her, urging him toward the light. The closer they got, the more she could taste freedom. The surface, the world beyond EtherTech's grasp. Just as they were almost through, The tunnel behind them erupted into chaos. Go! Go! Jace shouted, pulling Amelia and Lucas forward as the sound of gunfire erupted from the tunnel's entrance. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. They were so close, so close. But the guards were closing in faster than she expected. There was no way they were getting through without a fight. Stay down, Jace yelled, shoving Amelia and Lucas behind a row of metal crates just as bullets whizzed past them. Amelia could feel her pulse racing, the weight of the situation crashing down on her. They had no cover, no escape routes left. It was just a matter of time before Ethertech's forces found them. But then, just as all seemed lost, Lucas spoke. I can do it, he whispered, his voice filled with quiet resolve. I can stop them. Amelia turned to him, her eyes wide with fear. No, Lucas, no more. You're not ready. It's too dangerous. I can, Lucas insisted, his small face filled with determination. I have to. For you, for us. For the world. Amelia swallowed hard, her heart twisting in her chest. She didn't want to let him do it. Not like this, not when he was still so young. But she could see it in his eyes. He wasn't a child anymore. He was more than that now. Okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Okay, Lucas. But stay safe. Please. Lucas nodded, closing his eyes for a moment as his body began to glow again, brighter this time, the air around him shimmering with power. The tunnel felt alive with energy, as if everything were on the brink of exploding. And then, it happened. A wave of energy surged outward from Lucas, so powerful it knocked Amelia and Jace off their feet. The guards in front of them were thrown back, their weapons flying from their hands as the force of the blast rocked the entire tunnel. The walls groaned, the lights flickering, and the air became thick with an electric hum. When the dust cleared, Amelia opened her eyes to find the guards lying unconscious on the ground, their bodies scorched by the raw power of Lucas's energy. She stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. Lucas! He was panting, his small frame trembling with exhaustion, but he smiled up at her. Let's go, he said, his voice quiet but filled with strength. We're almost free. The silence after the battle was suffocating. Amelia stood over Lucas, watching the faint glow from his body flicker out, leaving only the faintest traces of light in the dark tunnel. The sounds of their ragged breathing echoed through the narrow space, mixing with the distant whirring of Ethertech's machinery somewhere deep beneath the surface. She felt a weight in the air, an oppressive sense of both victory and dread. Lucas had saved them, again. But at what cost? Jace was already on his feet, checking their surroundings for any more threats. He looked back at Amelia and Lucas, his brow furrowed. We don't have much time, he said, his voice low. They're going to send reinforcements soon. We need to move. Amelia nodded, but she couldn't tear her gaze away from Lucas. He was slumped against the wall, his small frame trembling from the exertion. Despite the immense power he had just unleashed, he still looked so fragile, so vulnerable. She knelt beside him, brushing a strand of sweat-drenched hair from his forehead. Lucas, she said softly, her voice full of concern. Are you okay? Can you keep going? Lucas looked up at her, his eyes still glazed from exhaustion, but there was a hint of that familiar determination in them. I'm okay, Mom. Just tired. Amelia's heart twisted. She knew he was lying, but she also knew he wouldn't stop. Not until they were free. Good, she said, forcing a smile. Let's get out of here. As they made their way through the tunnels, Jace led them down a series of turns, deeper into the facility. The further they went, the more it felt like they were descending into the belly of the beast, Ethertech's heart. I thought we were headed to the surface, Amelia said, her voice tight with confusion. Where are we going? Jace glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. Not yet. We need to find the control center. There's something you need to see. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, something I need to see? Jace didn't answer, but the answer was clear in his eyes. It wasn't just about escape anymore. They weren't just running from Ethertech. They were about to uncover something much more dangerous. Something that could change everything. They reached a large, reinforced door at the end of the hallway. Jace motioned for them to stay back, then typed a sequence of numbers into the keypad beside it. The door buzzed, a heavy lock disengaging, and it slid open with a quiet hiss. Inside was a room filled with rows of monitors, computers, and glowing screens. The hum of machines filled the air, and there was a strange coldness to the atmosphere, as if the room itself were alive with information. "This is EtherTech's central control hub," Jace explained. "The place where they monitor everything: communications, experiments, operations. If we can get to the main server, we can expose everything. All their secrets." Amelia's eyes widened. "You mean?" "I mean all of it," Jace interrupted. "Everything they've been hiding. The real reason they wanted Lucas." Before Amelia could ask anything else, Jace was already typing away at one of the terminals, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Amelia stood by, trying to process everything, but her mind kept returning to Lucas. He was standing beside her now, his hand gripping hers tightly, but his face was pale, his body swaying with fatigue. "Jace," Amelia said quietly, "I don't understand. What could be so bad that they would do all this? Use Lucas as some kind of tool?" Jace didn't look up from the terminal as he spoke, his voice grim. "You're not going to like what I'm about to show you." The screen flickered to life with a burst of static, and a series of encrypted files opened. Amelia's stomach churned as Jace navigated through them, opening one document after another. The words were technical, filled with jargon she couldn't understand, but the images and footage that accompanied them made her blood run cold. "Where is Lucas?" One of the files was titled. It contained surveillance footage of Lucas as a child. Her child, locked inside a sterile room, hooked up to machines, his body barely moving. Amelia's breath caught in her throat, her hand shaking as she reached out to touch the screen. "What is this? Why is he?" "This is what EtherTech has been doing," Jace said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "They weren't just experimenting on him. They were creating him. They had a team of scientists working day and night to unlock his potential. They knew about his abilities before you even knew, Amelia. They knew what he was capable of, what he would become." Amelia stumbled back, her heart slamming in her chest. No, this can't be true." "But it is," Jace said, his voice cold. "They engineered his abilities. They manipulated his genetics, his brain function, everything. Lucas wasn't born with this power. He was made to have it." The room felt like it was closing in on Amelia, her vision blurring as the weight of the revelation hit her. She couldn't breathe. Lucas was never just her son. He had been a project, an experiment, a weapon. "I'm sorry," Jace added, his voice thick with guilt. "I should have told you sooner. But I didn't know how deep it went until I got inside their system." Amelia's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, her mind reeling. All this time, she had been fighting for him, thinking that he was just a child, her child. But he wasn't just hers. He was a creation of EtherTech. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice cracking as she turned to him. I'm so sorry." Lucas stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. "I don't understand. They made me? Why?" Amelia pulled him close, hugging him tightly. "I don't know, sweetheart, but none of this was your fault. You're not their creation. You're my son." "I'm sorry," Lucas whispered again, his voice full of confusion and guilt. "I didn't want to be this way. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Amelia's heart broke for him. He was just a child, a scared, confused child who had been thrust into a nightmare he didn't ask for. Jace watched the exchange between Amelia and Lucas, his expression distant. He didn't speak for a long while, but when he did, his voice was soft and almost regretful. "There's more," he said. "Something worse. EtherTech's real plan was never to control Lucas. It was to create an army of children like him, superhuman soldiers who could be controlled through advanced neural programming. Lucas was just the first prototype. They didn't need him to be a child forever. They needed him to be a weapon that could be used against anyone who stood in their way." Amelia's head spun. "An army? But why?" Jace shook his head. "I don't know, but I do know this. If they've already made one like Lucas, they can make more. And they'll come after him, and us, until they have what they want." "Then we stop them," Amelia said. her voice suddenly firm. We stop them here. We expose everything, Jace. We let the world know what they've done, what they're planning. Jace turned to her, his eyes filled with something dark, something almost resigned. It won't be that simple, Amelia. Ethertech's influence is everywhere, and they won't go down without a fight. Amelia locked eyes with him. I don't care. We fight. We make them see that they've made a mistake. We'll take them down, for Lucas, for all the other kids they've used. Lucas, who had been silently absorbing the conversation, spoke up. His voice was small, but filled with quiet conviction. We can stop them. Together. Amelia's heart swelled with pride as she looked at her son. Yes, together. The silence in the control room was deafening. The screens flickered, casting an eerie glow on Amelia, Lucas, and Jace as they processed what had just been revealed. Amelia's chest felt heavy with the weight of the truth that Lucas, her precious son, had never truly been hers. He had been designed, engineered, and manipulated. It was almost too much to bear, but there was no time for mourning. The storm was already gathering, and they needed to act before it consumed them all. We can't just sit here, Amelia said, her voice steely. We need to make a plan. We can't let Ethertech get away with this. Jace turned toward the server racks at the far side of the room. I've downloaded everything. The files, the footage, the data they've been collecting on Lucas. I've got it all. He glanced back at Amelia. Now we just need to get this out of here. The rest of the world needs to know what Ethertech has done. Amelia nodded, though her heart was still in turmoil. How do we get it out? Ethertech controls everything. Jace. Communications, media, power. They'll shut us down the second they realize what we're doing. There's a safe house, Jace said quickly, shaking his head as if pushing aside his doubts. One of the people I've been working with has access to a secure server. We can upload everything there, but we need to move fast. Ethertech will be scrambling to find out who's behind this breach. They'll be looking for us. Amelia glanced at Lucas. The boy was standing near the screen, his eyes still wide with the weight of their discovery. His face had paled, and his small frame seemed even more fragile than usual. The energy he had unleashed earlier had drained him, and now, he looked like he could barely stay on his feet. Amelia's heart ached for him. Lucas, she said softly, kneeling beside him. Are you okay? Lucas swallowed hard, blinking as if trying to clear his mind. I'll be fine, Mom. I'm just tired. He hesitated before speaking again, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to be the weapon they made me, Mom. I don't want to hurt anyone. Amelia pulled him into a hug, her arms trembling as she held him close. You're not a weapon, Lucas. You're my son. You always have been. What they did to you, what they tried to make you, it wasn't your fault, and we'll fix it. Together. Lucas clung to her, nodding, but Amelia could feel the weight of his fear and confusion. He had never asked for any of this. None of them had. Jace cleared his throat, his voice grim. We don't have much time. We need to get moving. Amelia pulled away from Lucas, brushing the hair from his forehead. Let's go. They moved quickly through the labyrinthine tunnels, Jace leading the way. The air was thick with tension, each step heavier than the last as they neared their escape route. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every creak in the walls sent a shiver down Amelia's spine. But they couldn't stop now. There was no going back. As they approached an old service elevator, Jace typed in another code, and the rusted metal doors creaked open. He looked at them, his face set. This is it. Once we're up, we'll be on the surface. From there, we head to the safe house. It's a few miles away. We'll make it if we stay low. Amelia nodded, her grip tightening on Lucas's hand. She could feel the weight of the moment settling over them, the knowledge that they were about to step into a world that would never be the same. A world that had been shattered by the very people they were running from. As the elevator ascended, Amelia's thoughts raced. What happens if they get the data back? What happens if we're not fast enough? The doors of the elevator opened with a metallic hiss, and they stepped out into a narrow alley, the dim glow of streetlights barely cutting through the night. The world above ground felt different, strange and foreign, like they had emerged from one life and into another. But Amelia didn't have time to marvel at the change. There was only one thing on her mind: survival. They moved quickly through the streets, sticking to the shadows as much as possible. Amelia kept her eyes constantly darting around, watching for any signs that EtherTech had already begun its search. Lucas stumbled slightly, his small body still recovering from the toll of his power. Amelia squeezed his hand, offering him silent comfort. "How much further?" she asked Jace, her voice strained. "We're almost there," Jace replied, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "Just a couple more blocks." But before they could get any closer, the unmistakable sound of a siren sliced through the air, sending a chill down Amelia's spine. Her heart dropped. It was just a matter of time before they were found, but this was too soon. "Go!" Jace shouted, pushing Amelia and Lucas forward. "Run!" Amelia's pulse thundered in her ears as they sprinted down the street. The sound of sirens grew louder, closer. They were coming for them. She could hear the rapid footsteps of their pursuers, the familiar heavy boots of EtherTech's agents closing in. Lucas, still weak, was struggling to keep up. He tripped over a crack in the pavement, but Amelia grabbed his arm, pulling him upright. "Come on, sweetheart. We're almost there." The streetlights above flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the pavement. Amelia could feel the oppressive weight of EtherTech's pursuit bearing down on them. She had no idea how much longer they could outrun them, how much longer Lucas could keep going. Then, out of nowhere, the ground beneath them trembled, a distant roar shaking the street. Amelia skidded to a halt, looking up in confusion. What was that? From the darkness, a figure appeared. A tall man in a dark coat, his face partially obscured by a hood. He moved with a fluidity that was almost unnatural, his steps making no sound as he approached. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" she demanded, stepping in front of Lucas protectively. The man stopped a few feet away, his gaze fixed on her. "I'm someone who can help you," he said in a low, calm voice. "But we don't have much time. EtherTech is already on its way. You need to come with me now." Amelia eyed him warily. "How do you know about us?" "Let's just say I have my sources," the man said cryptically. "And if you want to stay alive, you'll trust me." Amelia hesitated. There was a part of her that wanted to keep running, to stay far away from anyone who might be connected to EtherTech, but the urgency in his voice told her there was no time to question him. "Mom," Lucas whispered, tugging at her sleeve. He looked up at the man, his eyes filled with confusion and exhaustion. "Are we safe with him?" Amelia looked at her son, then back at the stranger. For a brief moment, she wondered if they had any other choice. "We don't have time to debate," she said, her voice hard with resolve. "Lead the way." The man nodded, turning quickly and leading them into the shadows. The alley twisted and turned, each corner shrouded in darkness as the mysterious man led them deeper into the labyrinth of the city's underbelly. Amelia kept her grip tight on Lucas's hand, her heart pounding in her chest. Every step felt like it might be their last. Every creak, every distant sound made her jump, convinced that EtherTech's agents were hot on their trail. "Stay close," the man urged without looking back. "This way." They followed him through a series of underground tunnels, the air damp and musty. Amelia's eyes were wide with suspicion, but she had no choice but to trust him. There were no other options. She glanced over at Jace, who was walking behind them, scanning their surroundings with a wariness that mirrored her own. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a large, dimly lit room. The man waved them inside. "This is the safe house," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "It's secure. No one will find us here." Amelia stepped inside, looking around warily. The space was stark, with only the bare essentials: furniture, a few scattered pieces of equipment, and a single monitor at the far wall. It was nothing like the high-tech facilities of EtherTech, but it had a certain safety to it. Or at least, that's what she hoped. "Who are you?" Jace asked, his voice suspicious. "And why should we trust you?" The man turned to face them, removing his hood. His features were sharp, with short-cropped dark hair and piercing green eyes. There was something undeniably familiar about him, but Amelia couldn't quite place it. "My name is Marcus," the man said, locking eyes with them. I've been working against EtherTech for years. I've been monitoring their movements, gathering information, waiting for a chance to strike. I was going to approach you earlier, but I couldn't risk it. Amelia stepped forward. You knew about us? Marcus nodded grimly. I've been keeping an eye on Lucas for a long time. I knew EtherTech was going to target him. I tried to warn you, but they moved faster than I expected. You knew my son was special? Amelia's voice trembled, a mix of anger and betrayal rising in her chest. Marcus gave her a tight nod. Yes, but what EtherTech doesn't know is that I've been working with people on the inside. We've been sabotaging their operations for years. Now, with you two, we have the leverage we need to take them down for good. Jace's eyes narrowed. What's the catch? There's always a catch. Marcus's gaze darkened. EtherTech's reach is far. They have resources everywhere. If we're going to do this, we need to go after their heart. We need to expose them for what they really are. Their agenda, their experiments, their control over the government. We need to release everything, and we need to do it now. Amelia's mind raced. The world was on the brink of discovering what EtherTech had done, but there were still so many unknowns. The scale of their operation was monstrous. How could they possibly take it down? You said you had the leverage, Jace interjected. What do we have that EtherTech wants? Marcus looked at them both gravely. Lucas is the key. You saw the files. EtherTech doesn't just want him. They want to control him. But he's not just a weapon. He's their undoing. They can't afford for him to go public. If they can't control him, they lose everything. Amelia felt a shiver run down her spine. You mean, we're not just running from them. We're exposing them. That's right, Marcus said. But it's a dangerous move. If they find us before we upload the data, we won't survive. They have too many resources at their disposal, and they won't hesitate to destroy anyone who stands in their way. Amelia took a deep breath, looking at Lucas. He was standing quietly in the corner, his body still weak, but his eyes filled with a fierce determination. We don't have a choice, she said firmly. We'll fight. We'll expose them, no matter what. They didn't have much time. Marcus quickly got to work, setting up a makeshift command center in the safe house. He hooked up the files Jace had stolen from EtherTech's control hub to a secure satellite uplink. The plan was simple. Upload the data to every media outlet, every news station, every government agency that could take down EtherTech's empire. It was risky, but it was the only option they had left. Amelia paced back and forth as Jace kept watch by the door. The tension in the room was palpable, the seconds ticking by like hours. Every so often, Marcus would glance up at the screen, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he worked to encrypt the data. How long? Amelia asked, her voice tight. Just a few more minutes, Marcus replied. Once it's out there, we'll be able to track the reaction. If we're lucky, we'll hit them hard enough that they won't be able to recover. Lucky, Jace muttered under his breath, his eyes still scanning the room. We're going to need more than luck. Suddenly, the faint sound of a helicopter overhead made Amelia freeze. Her heart skipped a beat. It was too late. They'd found them. Marcus, Jace hissed. They're here. We've got company. Without missing a beat, Marcus turned to Amelia. We're not done yet. I need you to get Lucas out of here. Take the back exit. Amelia shook her head. I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice, Marcus snapped. We have one shot at this. You take Lucas and get to safety. I'll hold them off. Amelia's heart ached at the thought of leaving him, but she knew Marcus was right. If the data wasn't uploaded, they would have no leverage. The fight would be over before it began. Lucas, she said, kneeling in front of her son. You stay close to me, okay? We're getting out of here. We're not going to let them hurt you. Lucas nodded, his face pale but determined. I'll be okay, Mom. As they headed for the back exit, the sound of boots pounding on the floor above them grew louder. The agents were getting closer. Amelia's pulse raced. She didn't know how much longer they had. Suddenly, the front door burst open, and a group of EtherTech's black-clad soldiers stormed into the room. Marcus was already in position, standing at the center of the room, a single handgun in hand. I told you not to follow me, Marcus said coldly, his voice steady as he aimed the gun at the first soldier to step forward. The agents hesitated for a split second, just long enough for Marcus to fire. The shot rang out, echoing through the room, and the first agent fell. "Go!" Marcus shouted at Amelia and Lucas. "Get out of here!" Amelia didn't hesitate. She grabbed Lucas's hand and pulled him toward the back door, her heart pounding as she heard the rapid gunfire behind her. She glanced over her shoulder to see Marcus firing again, but the agents were closing in fast. They had to get out now. As they reached the alley behind the safe house, Amelia pulled Lucas close. "Keep moving. Don't stop." But it was already too late. A group of EtherTech agents had cut them off, surrounding the alley with weapons drawn. "Give it up, Amelia," one of the agents said, his voice cold. "You're not going anywhere." Amelia's heart slammed in her chest. She looked at Lucas, who was shaking beside her, but there was no time to hesitate. She had to protect him. And then, as the agents closed in, a brilliant, blinding light erupted from Lucas's body. With Lucas's powers now fully unleashed, the tide of battle shifts. In a final, breathtaking showdown, Amelia, Lucas, and Jace fight to expose EtherTech's darkest secrets and to stop them from ever threatening their world again. But victory will come at a price, and the truth will change everything, forever. The story ends with the dawn of a new beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?